Chapter 10:18. The eunuchs and palace maids were used to His Majesty's crazy behavior. Whenever His Majesty was thinking seriously, he would act like this. Compared to other things that His Majesty had done, this was nothing. A month ago, His Majesty gathered all the officials and nobles in front of the political hall. He sent 2 eunuchs to the top of the golden hall to throw down 2 iron balls, one big and one small from the same height. The iron balls fell to the ground at the same time under the witness of countless officials and nobles. The Academy of Science proposed the concept of free fall and calculated the value of gravitational acceleration considering air resistance. It was said that many of the Academy of Science's research was based on this concept. They didn't know what gravitational acceleration was, but after this experiment spread throughout the capital, 3 scholars went crazy within a few days. Since then, no one dared to question the Academy of Science anymore. It was said that His Majesty discovered this phenomenon when he was inspired by a strange woman in his early years. It was because of that woman that His Majesty embarked on the path of studying the laws of heaven and earth. To commemorate that strange woman, His Majesty named this experiment Xiao Huan Free Fall Experiment. Since then, the 5th of November every year has been designated as Science and Technology Day in the Jing Kingdom. Later generations also had high praise for this experiment. It was hailed as the first of the 10 most beautiful physics experiments in the Jing Kingdom. This experiment broke the rigid way of thinking, inspired people's wisdom, and had a profound impact on future generations. Of course, this was all in the future. Note, that's right, I copied the book review again. Thanks to Chidian reader Springwood 11 for your imagination. 2 hours later. Li Xian rubbed his slightly swollen head. His face was slightly pale. He finally saw the key point. The color of soap bubbles is caused by the superposition of light reflected from the front and back membranes. It's a phenomenon of light interference. He was startled. If the answer to the question was this simple, then the things he had read earlier, such as wave-particle duality, general relativity, quantum theory, Schrödinger's cat, Murphy's law, L'Hospital's law, all of these things that he had struggled so hard to understand, were all used by Li Yi to make up for the number of words in the book. Schrödinger's cat. What was the relationship between Schrödinger and old General Xue? He knew that the box might be poisoned, yet he still put the cat in. Did he ever consider the cat's feelings? Who was Murphy? Was he the descendant of the Mo family? The laws he proposed had nothing to do with the ideology of the Mo family. Who was Luo Beta? What was the limit? Why did he ask for guidance? If he ran fast enough, his sorrow would not be able to catch up with him. Was this the theory of relativity? But what did this have to do with his question? After staring blankly on the spot for a long time, his face finally revealed an embarrassed and angry expression. He sat back down and picked up the letter. A moment later, he suddenly slapped the table and said angrily, "This deranged fellow, he actually gathered 4,381 words this time." A figure walked in from outside and looked at Li Xian, asking in a low voice, "Imperial brother, did teacher send a letter?" Li Xian looked at the girl who was quietly standing in front of him with a smile. A trace of heartache flashed across his face as he smiled and said, "Yes, he said that Dwainer misses you very much and wants to come back to see you as soon as he grows up." The girl said with a smile, "I also miss Dwainer. I wonder if he has grown taller and how many teeth he has grown. I didn't say in this letter." Li Xian took out another letter from the table and handed it to her. He said, "This is a letter from him to you. Maybe it's written on it. Oh yes, there's also a letter from your imperial sister. When you return to the palace later, send it to her." "Thank you, Brother Xian." She took the letter. At this moment, a small figure ran in from outside. When she ran past the door, she accidentally tripped and fell. Without waiting for the eunuchs and palace maids to help her up, she got up by herself, patted the dirt off her body and ran to Li Xian. She raised her little face and asked, Daddy, is Dwainer back?" Li Xian picked her up and said, "Dwainer hasn't come back yet. When Xiao Rui grows up, Dwainer can come back to play with you." The little girl who had just turned 2 bit her finger and said seriously, "Then Xiao Rui has to grow up quickly." Somewhere in the palace, the little girl carefully opened the letter with a faint smile on her face. She murmured, "Dwainer already has 20 teeth. His height," she stood up and gestured. She murmured, "His height is already up to my waist. When he grows up, I won't be able to carry him." She carefully read the letter several times before putting it into an envelope and locking it in an exquisite box. There were already several letters lying in the box. 1 letter every month. There were a total of 8 letters now. In other words, her teacher had been gone for a full 8 months. When she received her teacher's first letter, her heart was filled with joy. She was so happy that she couldn't sleep for a few days. Later she wrote many pages of replies. Her wrists were sore. She had so many things she wanted to say to her teacher. She wanted to drink the soup that her teacher made. She wanted to eat the sugar figurines that her teacher bought for her. She wanted her teacher to put her on his neck to watch the fun. Later she burned the letters one by one. No amount of paper could finish writing all the things she wanted to say to her teacher. She believed that her teacher knew all the things she wanted to say. I wonder what was written in the letter that he wrote to my sister? She looked at the other letter on the table and picked it up. She walked out of the palace and headed in the direction of the Morning Dew Palace. The Morning Dew Palace. The princess, who had just finished practicing, changed her clothes and bathed, walked back into the palace. She looked at an old man standing in the middle of the palace and asked, "1 year is almost up. What plans does Chief Chong have?" Chongda raised his head and said, "There isn't much to see in the capital anymore. I plan to go take a look outside." This was once His Majesty's long-cherished wish. Now I can only fulfill it on His Majesty's behalf. Emingzu nodded and didn't say anything else. Chongda turned and walked out of the palace. After taking 1 step, he took another step back and asked, "I'll ask out of line. What plans does Your Highness have in the future?" "Chief Chong." Princess Xianing walked in from outside and nodded slightly at Chongda. She then handed the letter to Emingzu and said with a smile, "Sister, Sir has sent a letter." Emingzu took the letter and then thought of Chongda's question. However, when she raised her head to look, there was no one at the palace door. She put the letter away and asked the young girl beside her, "You have to manage the academy and the women's union. If you feel tired, you can put one down first." "I'm not tired." The young girl shook her head and said, "It's good to be busy every day. I can also learn many things that can't be learned from books. Sister, on the other hand, don't be too busy. Sir told me to keep an eye on you and not let you always stay up late. He said that girls who stay up late will age." Emingzu nodded. Every time he wrote to her, he would mention this. He said that girls who stayed up late would age easily and get wrinkles easily. It was easy for their hormones to go haywire, causing irregular menstruation and causing their breasts to shrink. He also said that if she became an old woman in the future, no one would want her. Therefore, she never opened Li Yi's letters in front of Xianing. Little girls were not allowed to read them. After he left, she became more and more unscrupulous. However, Shuzhou was thousands of miles away from the capital. Her hands could not reach there. She thought about it, sat down, took a pen and paper and began to write. The young girl walked to the side and asked curiously, "Sister, are you going to reply to Sir?" Emingzi shook her head and said, "This is for your sister Rui." In the Xianxia province, an official slammed the memorial sent by the Shuzhou provincial governor on the table and said angrily, "What an exorbitant demand! 1 million taels of silver. 1 million taels of silver is enough to fight several wars with the Qi kingdom. Why do they need so much money to suppress bandits? Do they think the money in the national treasury comes out of thin air? Such an unreasonable request must not be agreed to." Chapter 10:19. The official was referring to a memorial that Qin Chong, the provincial governor of Shuzhou, had just sent over. Everyone was familiar with the name Qin Chong. The Qin clan was once illustrious for a time. Qin Qing was one of the pillars of the imperial court, and Qin Chong's name was known by everyone in the imperial court. Of course, that was the Qin family in the past. Later, the king of Shu lost power and was implicated by the Cui family. The Qin family soon declined. Qin Chong was stripped of his official position and his property was confiscated. He was reduced to opening a cloth shop in the capital to make a living. For a long time, this matter was a topic of discussion among the officials in the imperial court. He thought that the Qin family would never have a chance to rise again in this life, but he didn't expect that in just a year, the Qin family would become the provincial governor of Shuzhou. Shuzhou was the fief of the Jiang of Silla and the most special prince of the Jing kingdom. The imperial court could not interfere with the appointment of the provincial governor of Shuzhou, nor could they criticize him. They accused him of something else. According to the memorial, after the Jiang of Silla arrived in Shuzhou, he launched a vigorous campaign to suppress bandits. All the officials knew that there were many bandits in Shuzhou. For many years the imperial court and local officials tried to suppress them, but to no avail. As time went by, he took a laissez-faire attitude towards this matter. They did not care whether the Jiang of Silla suppressed the bandits or not. The problem was that if he wanted to suppress bandits, it was just to suppress bandits. Why did he make it seem like he was at war with the Qi kingdom, the Wu kingdom and the Zhao kingdom at the same time? Although the national treasury had not been so tight for the past 2 years, they could not be so extravagant. This was clearly blackmail. Someone looked up at the indignant official and asked, "Then Lord Qi, do you think that we should choose the second option? Xuzhou does not pay taxes for 50 years. Although the Xuzhou is the fief of the Jiang of Silla, it is also the land of the Jing kingdom. How can we do this?" Lord Qi waved his hand and said, "We will not choose either of these two options. You can tell this to His Highness the Jiang of Silla and His Majesty." The official shook his head and said no more. His Highness the Jiang of Silla was more favored by His Majesty than the Empress. If this memorial was sent directly to His Majesty, he would probably approve it immediately. Back then they were the ones who had forced King Jing to Xuzhou. Now if they dared to add insult to injury, even if King Jing was far away in Xuzhou and could not do anything to them, His Majesty would not let them off easily. Because of the departure of the Jiang of Silla, the conflict between them and His Majesty had not been completely resolved. Moreover, this matter was not that difficult to choose. Xuzhou had always been a sore point for the imperial court. It could be said that they did not care about it. It was indeed the territory of the Jing kingdom. But if they did care about it, that place was too chaotic. The imperial court could not reach that far. Its existence was of little value. It would only drag the imperial court down and pull down the per capita GDP of the country. All the data from the Ministry of Revenue could prove this point. It was tasteless, but it was a pity to throw it away. Therefore, when His Majesty conferred Xuzhou to the Jiang of Silla, there was almost no opposition in the imperial court. Even if the Xuzhou did not pay taxes for 50 years, it would not affect the overall situation. That place was so chaotic. It was the Wu kingdom, the Qi kingdom and the land of chaos. It was not easy to throw the blame to the Jiang of Silla, but no one was willing to pick it up again. The two prime ministers were not present, so the ministers had a discussion and finally made a decision. They would submit this memorial to His Majesty and the princess. Li Xian had already gotten rid of the low-level interest of blowing soap bubbles. He held a prism and fiddled with it under the sun. The 2-year-old girl stood beside him and looked at it without blinking. She murmured, "Why hasn't Daddy conjured a rainbow yet? Uncle Li conjured one so quickly." The little girl clapped her hands happily and ran over to show off to her mother. She was so happy that she finally managed to achieve the dispersion phenomenon. "Mother, Daddy conjured a rainbow for Xiao Rui just now." After a while, Wang Qin walked over with the little girl in her arms. Li Xian looked at her and said, "That guy is going to get married soon and he's going to marry 2 at once. Isn't His Majesty going to get married soon? What's there to be envious about? Are you envious that the Jiang of Silla can marry 2? Wang Qin looked at him and said, "If His Majesty is willing, he can marry more than the Jiang of Silla. In addition to the imperial concubines, he can also have a few more concubines. What are you saying? Am I as fickle and beastly as him?" Li Xian said righteously as he held the mother and daughter in his arms. Wang Qin blushed slightly and gently pinched him. "You're already an emperor, but you're still not serious. Xiao Rui is still here." The little girl covered her eyes and quickly said, "Xiao Rui can't see anything, she can't see anything." The family of 3 laughed and played for a while. Then Wang Qin took the little girl to sleep. Li Xian walked back to the hall and opened the memorial at the top. He only glanced at it and used a red brush to circle the words, "Xuzhou will not pay taxes for 50 years. He sighed and said, "I really want to see with my own eyes what you can make Xuzhou look like." The reason he chose this option was not because he was reluctant to part with silver, but because he knew that a mere 1 million taels of silver could not compare to the Xuzhou that he governed. Because if he didn't check the second option, he wouldn't receive any reply next month. More importantly, according to his description, Xuzhou was a good place. It sounded like it was a lot more fun than the capital. Xuzhou, the provincial governor's residence. Qin Chong looked at the imperial edict that Li Yi had delivered and felt his lips go dry. His Majesty had actually agreed. He had agreed to allow Xuzhou to develop freely for these 50 years and not have to pay taxes to the court. This was an imperial edict. The emperor did not joke about it, and there was no such thing as a trifling edict. The officials in court would no longer have the chance to regret it. When it came to Shuzhou, if they wanted to throw it away, they could throw it away. However, Shuzhou was not a place that they could throw away or pick up as they pleased. After today, they could only look at the rich and populous Shuzhou with envy. After following at Li Yi's side for so long, he now seemed to understand why Li Yi had never been willing to enter the court when he was in the capital. Because the people in the court were basically a bunch of pigs. One could imagine what would have happened if the court had not interfered for so many years and allowed Shuzhou to develop freely. The reason he was able to sit step by step in the position of censor was not because of the Qin family. Thus he could clearly see that in less than 50 years, Shuzhou would become even more prosperous than Qing and Fu and Jingdou. At that time, would they still feel heartache over the 1 million taels of silver? Jiang of Silafu. Li Yi looked at Fong and asked, other than the imperial edict, is there anything else? Fong nodded and said, there is also a letter. Li Yi casually asked, from Li Xian. Fong shook his head and said, from the princess. Li Yi was stunned and asked in disbelief, which princess? The eldest princess. Ah. Li Yi suddenly stood up from his seat. Why didn't you say so earlier that the eldest princess sent a letter? Quick, show it to me. Fong took a step back and shook his head. He said, the eldest princess did send a letter, but it was not for the son-in-law. Li Yi was stunned on the spot. If the eldest princess's letter was not for him, who else could it be for? To Yongning, to Rui? It couldn't be for Mississippi Lu, could it? Fong looked at him and explained, this letter was written by the eldest princess to the second young mistress. What? Angzi gave it to Rui? Li Yi was stunned again. Emingzu and Rui. Their relationship didn't seem to be so good that they would write letters to each other, right? Besides, he had written so many letters to her, but she didn't reply to any of them. She actually took the initiative to write to Mississippi Lu. This didn't make sense, nor did it make sense. Li Yi shook his head and said, I don't believe it. Let me have a look. Fong took out the letter from his sleeve and put it on the table. I told you to read more. Li Yi looked at the letter and looked at him with disappointment. He pointed at the words on the envelope and said, look, it clearly says for Li Yi. Why is it written for Rui? Although you can't read, you can't talk nonsense. Fong looked a little sad and said, son-in-law, you are insulting me. Although I can't read, I know how to count. For Li Yi is 4 words, for Lu Rui is 5 words. He shook his head and continued, and I asked the courier. This letter is indeed for the second young mistress. Son-in-law, don't lie to me and don't lie to yourself. Li Yi finally understood why Fong's martial arts had stagnated. He was ignorant and incompetent. He was simply ignorant and incompetent. He didn't practice but secretly learned. He obviously didn't know how to count before. Chapter 10:20. Even if she wrote it to Rui, can't I read it? Li Yi took the envelope from his hand and said, what is my relationship with Emingzu and Rui? The 3 of us are like one person. Is it wrong for me to read the letter I wrote to myself? Fong looked at him and said seriously, young master, I advise you not to read it. Li Yi tore the envelope in front of him and took out the letter. Fong looked at him and did not say anything. He just patted him on the shoulder, sighed and turned to leave. You're getting more and more insensible. Li Yi glanced at him. He took Mingzhu's letter and planned to go back to his room to read it. However, he did not go back. He stood there for a long time and wiped the sweat on his forehead. He opened the letter and handed it to Mississippi Lu and said, this is a letter from Emingzu to you. I opened it for you. Fong was insensible. He did not know Rui when he saw her, so he opened the letter and handed it to her. After Li Yi handed the letter to Mississippi Lu, he asked thoughtfully, do you want me to read it for you? Mississippi Lu said indifferently, read it if you want. That's embarrassing. Li Yi looked at the letter in her hand. Mississippi Lu turned and went back into the house. Li Yi looked at her back and sighed and shook his head. Saying one thing and going back on one's words. Oh, women. Li Yi leaned against the pillar and was puzzled. Emingzi did not reply to him. What kind of letter did she write to Rui? Tong Da and old Taoist Yuan were both gurus and they were close to each other. In terms of distance and strength, there was no reason for them to ask Mississippi Lu for guidance. It could be said that they were confiding in each other's bosom friends, but they were not bosom friends. They would fight whenever they saw each other. It was impossible for them to chat about their daily lives. Emingzu would never compare who was older with Mississippi Lu in the letter. That would be asking for humiliation. What did they have to say in the letter? Li really couldn't understand. No matter how he thought about it, it was all Fang's fault. In the past he was such a simple, kind and qualified wingman. Ever since he got together with Little Red he had completely changed. Emingzu had written a letter to Rui, but she hadn't told him in advance. What if what would he do? There was no way he could explain this to Rui, let alone the old emperor. Soon Rui came out of the room. Li Yi pretended to ask casually, "What did she say in the letter?" Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said lightly, "The letter is on the table in the room. If you want to read it, go and read it yourself." "I don't want to read it." Li Yi shook his head and walked into her room. He said, "The letter you borrowed from me last time. Bah, it's time to return the book you borrowed from me. I'll go and get it myself." The letter was indeed on her desk. When Li Yi walked over he glanced at it. There were only 2 lines of words. It didn't look like a letter at all. He took a book from the bookshelf. When he walked over he stopped and finally saw the 2 lines clearly. "He teased me." That was the first line. "Help me beat him up, I'll help you next time." This was the second line. Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu who was standing at the door and curled his lips. It was fine if she didn't want him to read it, but why did she have to take out a fake letter? She must have written it herself. Emingzu was the princess of a country, and there was no distinction between them. How could she say something like that? What's more, he wrote this letter just to get Rui to beat him up. What's this, Didi call? A clumsy self-directed performance. This Rui was getting more and more out of hand. Women. Then he saw the woman begin to close the door. Li Yi's expression changed and he immediately said, "You don't really believe what she said, do you?" Mississippi Lu didn't say anything and walked straight towards him. Li Yi retreated to the bedside and said, "We are a family. Emingzu is still an outsider for the time being. Are you sure you want to listen to her one-sided words?" Mississippi Lu looked at him and said, "You just said that the 3 of us are like one person and I beat myself up. Is that wrong?" Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "I was wrong. You used a wrong conclusion and you can only come up with an even more wrong conclusion. I am not you, so beating me up is not the same as beating yourself up." Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, "Then what is the correct conclusion?" "You are you, the unique you. Emingzu and I are like one person. If she wants to beat me up, I have nothing to say." Mississippi Lu thought for a moment, looked at him and said, "You and Emingzu are like one person and Li Emingzu and I are also like one person, so you and I are also like one person." Li Yi's eyes widened. "How can you 2 be like one person?" Mississippi Lu looked at him and said, "I have taken a bath with her." "Have you?" "I have even slept with her." "Have you?" Li Yi looked at her and said disdainfully. Li Yi remembered that once in the morning dew hall, the 2 of them were discussing national affairs, and then Emingzu was so sleepy that she fell asleep on his shoulder. He was never afraid of who was closer to Emingzu. She had seen Emingzu take a bath and he had seen her take a bath. Mississippi Lu was stunned, then looked at him and murmured, "You have slept together." When Li Yi walked out of Mississippi Lu's room, Fang was squatting in the yard watching him walk out. Hitting is a sign of affection and scolding is love. Fang looked at him and said, "The harder you hit, the deeper the love. You should be content, son-in-law. You should know that second miss never treats others like that." Fang was not only ignorant and incompetent, but also shamelessly plagiarized. The shameless Fang looked at Li Yi and said, "Son-in-law, sit." "I'm not sitting." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I've been sitting in Rui's room for too long." Fang looked at him and didn't expose him. He thought for a moment and asked, "Son-in-law, it will be New Year in 2 days and the 15th is coming soon. Should we prepare?" "A few days earlier. Don't ruin the Lantern Festival." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "The 11th day of the first month is a good day. Tell them to attack on the 11th. Fang thought for a moment and asked, "Then should we tell Chen Chong to mobilize some troops from other places?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "No need. The garrison of Yong County is the same as before. They won't be needed this time." It had to be said that the holy religion couldn't be underestimated. Their followers were all hidden in the dark. Other than those people, there were even more hidden spies. From the information obtained so far, they should have already infiltrated the defense of Yong County. If they mobilized the garrison of Shuzhou, they definitely wouldn't be able to cover up all the movements and would definitely alert the enemy. When the king of Shu escaped, it would be difficult to catch him again. All right, I'll arrange it right away. Fong responded and turned to leave. After Fong left, Li Yi rubbed his buttocks and an extremely depressed expression appeared on his face. Emingzu and Rui were actually in cahoots, writing a letter to Rui from thousands of miles away just to beat him up. More importantly, Rui actually believed her one-sided words and sided with her. Beating them up was a sign of affection and scolding them was a sign of love. Sooner or later he would settle the scores with those two women and let them know how much he loved them. A love that couldn't be expressed in words. Chapter 10:21. As the new year approached, the people of Yong County finally knew what was going on with the newly built shopping mall at the West Gate. Shops, they were all shops. They were too much for one's eyes to take in and they lingered on for a long time. There were restaurants, brothels, inns, cloth stores, clothing stores, music stores, jewelry stores. There was even a market that occupied 5 shops. From now on they didn't need to travel all over the county just to buy a few things. In this small shopping mall, there was nothing they couldn't think of. In the past, the people living near the West Gate were the poorest people in Yong County. In the past few months, the situation had changed dramatically. Businessmen from all over could no longer rent shops in the shopping mall. Yong County temporarily prohibited foreign businessmen from buying and selling land, so they could only pay high rents to the surrounding people and rent their houses as shops. They immediately became the wealthiest group of people in the county. These people weren't the only ones whose lives had changed. The textile workshops had also provided many ways for the idle women at home to earn money. They could choose to weave at home and sell to the textile workshop, or they could work in the textile workshop for a fixed monthly salary. They could also raise silkworms and sell the silk. The fabrics and clothing of the Jing Kingdom, especially silk, were very popular in all countries. No matter how many goods they produced, they didn't have to worry about not being able to sell them. The tradition of men farming and women weaving didn't change, but the delicate women used their skillful hands to support half of the sky at home. Later research showed that in Yong County, the famous hometown of silk in the Jing Kingdom, the tradition of men living off women and being afraid of their wives originated from this. Although the standard of living had improved, the spending power of the people in Yong County was limited. They still had to rely on these businessmen from all over the country. Even though they had to pay taxes to the local government and the rent for the shops in the shopping mall wasn't cheap, it was still much better than taking the risk of traveling all over the mountains and rivers. Just 2 days after the opening, the shopping mall was already crowded with people. After all, it was stupid not to take advantage of a good deal. Many of the shops in Yong County had opening promotions and year-end clearance sales at the same time. If they missed this opportunity, they would have to wait until next year. 10 coins for all, 10 coins for all. You can't buy for 10 coins, you can't buy for 10 coins, you can't buy for 10 coins, you can't buy for 10 coins. The shopkeeper is in a hurry to go home for the new year. He's selling at a loss, selling at a loss. Last 2 days, last 2 days. The shopkeeper ran away with his sister-in-law. We can only use the Rui dew and perfume to pay for our wages. Everything is half price, everything is half price. Whenever a shop advertised like this, there would be an endless stream of customers, causing the surrounding peers to be dumbfounded. 10 copper coins, half price loss. If everyone did business like this, then all the merchants in this world would have starved to death long ago. These businessmen from the Jing Kingdom really had no bottom line. Was silver so important that he was willing to throw away his face for it? However, when they looked at the crowded shop and the few people in their shop, the expressions on the others' faces became complicated. Finally, a few of them whispered a few words into the ears of their shop assistants. The assistants hesitated for a moment before walking out of the shop. New store opening, second item half price. Buy 3 get 1 free, buy 5 get 2 free, buy 10 get 5 free. Opening discount. 10 coins will be deducted for every 100 coins. 50 coins will be deducted for every 300 coins. The crowd split into several groups and rushed towards the shops. Amidst the crowd, a man in blue walked out of the shopping mall. He looked back for a long time before turning around and exiting the city gate from another direction. Opposite the shopping mall, on the second floor of a tea house, another man in blue withdrew his gaze and stood up. He respectfully said to the young man opposite him, "Lord Su, this man is Xing Bang, a blue-clothed messenger of the church. He works under the right emissary." In the land of Bedlam, a man in blue looked at Fong Yu and said, "Guardian, it has been confirmed. That place has indeed been turned into a market. I've seen it with my own eyes. The shops there are doing very well. If we attack from the west gate, we can first rob them of all their goods and money. It's very convenient. Fang Yu lowered his head and thought for a moment. He asked, "Is there any movement in the defense of Yong County?" The man in blue thought for a moment and said, "Nothing out of the ordinary. I've already contacted our spy. He said that there are no signs of movement in the defense of Yong County. If there is any news, he will inform us immediately." Fang Yu nodded and said, "On the 14th of the first month." "That's not appropriate." The king of Shu strode in from outside and said, "Baldy's men are here. They suggest that we attack a few days earlier on the 11th of the first month. The 15th of the first month is the Lantern Festival. 3 days before that, the defense of the county will definitely be strengthened. It's most suitable to attack on the 11th of the first month. It can minimize the losses." Fang Yu thought for a moment and felt that what the king said made sense. Then he seemed to think of something and frowned. He said, "According to the almanac, it's forbidden to go out on the 11th of the first month." The king of Shu knew that the holy religion was troublesome, but he didn't expect it to be so troublesome. They already had the empress, so why would they still believe in the almanac? He frowned and asked, "Where is the almanac?" Fang Yu pointed to the table. The king of Shu walked over to take a look and picked it up. He smiled and said, "This is this year's. In a few days it'll be next year. This almanac is outdated. It'll be the 11th of the first month." He looked at Fang Yu and said, "I'll send someone to inform those baldies. They'll start preparing now and strive to be foolproof." Fang Yu was silent for a moment and nodded. "All right." The two discussed for a while more before the king of Shu left in a hurry. He stepped out of the door and looked up at the sky. His lips curled into a smile and he said eerily, "Li Yi Jiang of Silla. We'll meet soon. Are you surprised? Are you surprised? Aren't you going to get married soon? I'll give you a big gift before your wedding." Inside the house, Fang Yu looked at the person behind him and said, "Go get a new almanac." "Yes, guardian." The person nodded and immediately went out. Then he came back with a new almanac. The 11th of the first month of the year of Yi Kai. This is the heaven's wish for the holy religion to make Yi Kai. Fang Yu was very satisfied with this and nodded. He looked at the person and said, "You may leave first." "Yes." The disciple walked out. He still had a little doubt in his heart. The almanac said Yi Kai, but it didn't say who Yi Kai was. What if it was Yi Kai? Somewhere on a mountain in the fringe. Several figures were climbing the mountain path with difficulty. They were panting from exhaustion. "I say, why don't we take the main road? Why do we have to climb over the mountains? Don't complain. Although the main road has been repaired by those baldies, it's still better to take shortcuts quickly. If you delay His Highness' business, be careful of your head. Say, do you think that baldi's place is really as good as they say? A city in the mountains with restaurants, brothels, and even a school? I don't believe it. It doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. You'll know when you see it with your own eyes." The group was chatting as they climbed the mountain. When they reached a certain point, the view before them suddenly opened up. A clear path led straight to the top of the mountain. As far as the eye could see, there seemed to be the shadows of buildings hidden in the forest. Just as the group took a few steps forward, several arrows suddenly shot out from the forest and stabbed into the ground in front of them. The person walking at the front couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. If those arrows had been a few inches higher, his foot would have been pierced through. Chapter 10:22. The Heavenly King covers the Earth Tiger. Just as the few of them were shocked, a cold voice came from the forest. On the mountain path, the leader was stunned. When he regained his senses, he immediately said, I know, the pagoda suppresses the river demon. It's the pagoda suppresses the river demon. We're on the same side. Muha. Sawadika. Why are you blushing? Lin Zhong's voice softened as he asked again. That person immediately said, I'm in high spirits. Why is it yellow again? It's a wax to prevent the cold. After a while, a voice came from the forest. Continue forward, there will be someone ahead to receive you. This was considered a code. The few of them were relieved. These baldies were indeed very particular. Before entering the village, they had to memorize so many codes. Moreover, they sounded more powerful, like the slang of bandits. Unlike their own prince, who had learned everything from others and insisted on changing the code to, the king of Shu is not a fish in a pond, He will transform into a dragon in the face of a storm. They were too embarrassed to mention it to others. In comparison, although the code of these Baldies was complicated and difficult to remember, it was much more shameless than the King of Shu's. Thank you, brother. One of them cupped his hands at Lin Zhong, and the few of them quickly disappeared on the mountain path. Not long after, another figure slowly walked along the mountain path. When he walked under a tree, he stopped and looked into the forest. His lips moved slightly. Beep beep. He made two sounds, one long and two short sounds. Secret codes like Heavenly King covers the Earth Tiger, which had been eliminated by them, were used to distinguish between friend and foe. Their secret codes had long been upgraded and changed every half a month. If an enemy wanted to pretend to be one of their comrades, they would die a horrible death. Beep beep. He did not stand in place for long. Soon the same response came from the forest. Another youth with a bow and arrow walked out of the forest. He looked at him and nodded, saying, "They're back. They're back." That person nodded as well. He took out an item from his sleeve and handed it over, saying, "This is the attack plan and route map. Remember to let them bring it when they leave. Send my regards to the king and the alliance master." What's the hurry? It's only a few days. You can ask them yourself. I'm leaving. See you later. After a brief exchange, the young man with the bow and arrow on his back once again hid in the forest, while the figure of the other person also slowly disappeared from the mountain path. At the top of the mountain, the few of them stood on the bluestone paved street and looked at the city in front of them. They were dumbstruck and couldn't take another step forward. Neat streets, rows upon rows of shops, and rows upon rows of neat wooden houses looked exactly the same from the outside. Even outside the fringe, it was rare to see such a scene in the big cities of the Jing Kingdom. Compared to the territory of these Baldies, the place they lived in was at most a kennel. This was Li Yi's first New Year's Eve in Shuzhou. Although they were far away from the capital, the atmosphere of the new year was even stronger. Perhaps it was because there were fewer social activities, only a simple family. It was just like the pure New Year when he first came here. The only difference was that the people of Shuzhou were too enthusiastic. In just a few days, the Jiang of Silla residents received a few houses full of gifts. Although they weren't valuable, they still represented the people's goodwill. Li Yi also asked the gatekeeper to prepare red envelopes for all the people who came to his residence with gifts. This was considered reciprocity. Shuzhou had already begun to develop rapidly. The lives of the people would get better and better, and their wallets would naturally become more and more full. Although there was still a big gap from the level he had hoped for, some things could not be achieved overnight. It was almost impossible for a state to catch up with the capital without 10 or 20 years of development. All he had to do now was to wait patiently. Fong walked in from outside with an envelope in his hand. After opening it, Li Yi looked at it and said, "So, they have a spy in Yong County who has the ability to secretly open the West Gate on the night of the 11th day of the first month?" That's what they said, but they didn't say who it was. Fong nodded and said, "I've already asked Old Chin to investigate. It's very simple. It's the person who was in charge of guarding the West Gate that day." Very soon, people from the provincial governor's estate arrived. Li Yi looked at the things that Qin Chong had sent over. The officer who was usually in charge of guarding the West Gate had been knocked on the head by someone on his way home after drinking last night and was slightly injured. His duty had been temporarily taken over by one of his subordinates. Li Yi put down the paper and said in a small voice, "Captain, son-in-law, I suddenly have an idea," Fong suddenly said after some thought. Li Yi turned his head to look at him. "What idea?" "I think that ambushing people on the walls to shoot arrows, splash boiling oil, throw stones. This is a bit too troublesome." He looked at Li Yi and thought for a moment. "Son-in-law, what do you think about directly throwing in heavenly punishment?" Li Yi was startled. Isn't this a bit too much?" "It's not too much." Fong slapped his thigh and said, "I think this is a very good idea. It's simple and direct. Throw in a few heavenly punishments, and the people will think that it's New Year's firecrackers. Before daybreak we can just send the city guards over to clean up the mess. One shouldn't be too Fong. One should always leave a way out in the future. Throwing in a few heavenly punishments would not blow up the king of Shu or the bandits of the holy religion. It would blow up the productivity. Shu province was about to enter a stable stage of development. After things settled down here and the king of Shu and emissary of the right were defeated, they would officially start marching into the land of chaos. At that time they would be most lacking in manpower. Therefore these people couldn't be blown up. It's better to prepare archers. Li Yi said after some thought. Fong looked at him and asked, what if they put up a fierce resistance and would rather die than surrender? Li Yi thought for a moment and added, prepare more heavenly punishments as well just in case. Throughout the year even the usually quiet and desolate Yong County would become lively and bustling. The liveliness reached a climax during the New Year's Day and then gradually subsided. It was only after the 10th day of the new year that there were signs of recovery. All the people in the city had to prepare for the upcoming Lantern Festival. Today was the 11th day of the new year. The streets in the city were not crowded. A few months ago, Shu province had lifted the curfew. However, due to the large number of people during the New Year's Day, it was difficult to maintain law and order. In the days before the Lantern Festival, people were not allowed to walk on the streets after midnight. At this moment it was still early. The shops and houses in the city were still brightly lit. However, outside the city most of the people had already gone to bed. 10 miles away from the west gate of Yong County, on the dark and difficult-to-walk mountain path, a crowd of people suddenly appeared. At the front of the crowd, Fong Yu looked at the person beside him and said in a low voice, tell them to hurry up. We have to hurry. We must reach the west gate before midnight. Yes, Guardian. The person responded and immediately turned to walk to the back. On the other side, the king of Shu turned and asked, can your people in the city be trusted? Fong Yu nodded and said in a deep voice, don't worry. There are some spies in the holy religion that only purple-clothed emissaries and above are qualified to contact. At midnight they will open the west gate. When that time comes we will march straight in. You lead the people and charge straight to the Jiang of Silla residence. We will be responsible for dealing with the guards in Yong County. We will meet outside the west gate in 2 hours. Chapter 1023. Hearing Fong Yu's words, the king of Shu nodded with a pleased smile on his face. This time they had mobilized more than 3,000 men, all carefully selected elites. Wouldn't it be a piece of cake to take down Yong County, which only had a few hundred soldiers? He finally had the chance to settle the score with that person. Fong Yu turned around and saw the king of Shu's ferocious face under the moonlight. He frowned and reminded, don't forget we want to capture him alive this time. When we get the information we need you can do whatever you want to him. He knew about the blood feud between the king of Shu and Li Yi. He was worried that the king of Shu would kill him in a fit of rage. If that happened the holy religion would be in vain. They missed the chance to force the king of Tian Fa to reveal the secret recipe last time, but they couldn't miss it this time. The king of Shu nodded and said eerily, don't worry, I can't bear to kill him so quickly. I want to bring him back and play with him slowly. After reminding the king of Shu, Fong Yu looked at the bald man on the other side and cupped his fists. Commander Wang, the success of tonight's operation depends on you. Wang Wei smiled and said, you don't have to worry about that. As long as you can fulfill your promise, leave the soldiers of Yong County to us. Ambassador Fong, do you still not believe in our strength and reputation? Wang Wei looked at him and said with a faint smile. Fong Yu cupped his fists again. Thank you, Commander Wang. I trust your reputation. The key to this operation was the 1,000 men led by the bald man. They were powerful and extremely difficult to deal with. Without them, the holy religion would suffer heavy losses. When the time came, they would be the vanguard, and the holy religion would just have to fulfill their conditions afterward. If there were any accidents and the holy religion suffered heavy losses, it wouldn't matter. The territories of these bald men in the fringe could be taken over by the holy religion. No matter what, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage. At first he was worried that these baldies would easily agree to this and that there might be some kind of trap. But now that things had come to this, there was no turning back. If there was a trap, it could only be that they were colluding with the government and Li Yi. But an official and a bandit, a soldier and a thief, was this possible? Yong County West Gate. The curfew had arrived and the shopping malls were all closed. Only a row of soldiers carrying 2 lanterns patrolled back and forth. The west gate was different from the other 3 gates. Once out of the gate, one would be at the foot of the mountain. There were very few pedestrians there, so the gate was not open all year round. Originally, there was no need for night patrols. Recently, because of the construction of a shopping mall here, they temporarily added such a team to guard against bandits. Late at night before the Lantern Festival, it was still very cold. Being blown by the cold wind, The patrolling soldiers walked more than a dozen laps and felt a little annoyed. However, this was their duty, not to mention that the team leader was still around, so they did not dare to relax at all. After an unknown number of laps, the person at the front signaled for everyone to stop and asked, "What time is it now?" One of them replied, "Sir, it should be almost midnight. It's already at this time." The team leader said, then turned around and said, "There aren't so many bandits in the city now. There's no need for so many people to be exposed to the cold wind here. How about this, the few of you go back and rest first. After 2 hours, come back and replace us." The people who were pointed out by him were stunned and immediately said, "It's better if the team leader goes back and rest first. We can still hold on." The team leader waved his hand and said, "If I tell you to go, just go. What's with all this nonsense? I still want to walk around a little longer and go back to sleep later in the night." At this point, those people no longer insisted. The captain was injured, so the patrolling of the West Gate was under the responsibility of Captain Su. Naturally, they had to obey his arrangements. The public security of Yong County was good now, and the patrolling was just a casual process. There would not be any major incidents. "Thank you, team leader." The few people nodded, cupped their hands at Captain Su and dispersed. When their figures completely disappeared, Captain Su looked in the direction of the city gate and murmured, "It's about time. Hurry up, don't delay the great emissary's important matter." He led a few figures through the shopping mall and hurried in the direction of the city gate. In the dense forest outside the western city gate of Yong County, a bald man looked at the city wall that was faintly discernible in the darkness and said in a low voice, "Hey Envoy Fong, is the person you're talking about reliable? Can he be trusted? Will he stand us up?" Fong Yi did not look back. He looked in the direction of the city wall and shook his head. "Impossible. The people of my holy religion are loyal to Her Majesty. They are absolutely trustworthy." "Loyal to Her Majesty?" Wang Wei thought for a moment and asked, "Then why can't you contact those believers in Suzhou?" Fong Yu's chest heaved and he said firmly, "Don't worry, Commander Wang. This time there will definitely be no problem." "That's hard to say." Wang Wei shook his head, looked at him and reminded him, "Brother Fong, don't blame me for not reminding you. The moral degeneration of the world is getting worse, and people's hearts are not what they used to be. Some people call you brothers on the surface and seem to be on your side, but they are actually spies of the enemy. At the critical moment they will betray you and make all your previous efforts go to waste. You have to be careful." All of Fong Yu's attention was on the city gate. Hearing this, he waved his hand and said, "Commander Wang, you worry too much. Do not have the heart to harm others, but do not have the heart to guard against others." Before Wang Wei finished speaking, as if to confirm Fong Yu's words, in the darkness, the tightly closed city gate suddenly opened a gap. Then it opened wider and wider, until it was completely open. "The city gate is open." The king of Shu suppressed his voice and said in a low and excited voice, "How is it? Do you believe me now, Commander Wang?" Fong Yu glanced at him and said with a smile, "Brothers, what are you waiting for? Charge." Wang Wei looked behind him and said to the people behind him. Then he took the lead and led hundreds of people towards the city gate. The king of Shu and Fong Yu looked at them charging in front, and a smile appeared on their faces. These baldies were really trustworthy to charge in front to attack a city. After Wang Wei and his people rushed down, the king of Shu followed closely behind. According to the intelligence, after rushing through the city gate, they would enter the so-called shopping mall. In the middle of the shopping mall was a huge open space, surrounded by shops forming a ring shape. The open space in the middle was very big, and it did not seem crowded even when more than 2,000 people rushed in at once. Fong Yu, on the other hand, followed behind everyone with an indifferent expression. This time, after capturing Li Yi and getting the formula of Tian Fa out of him, he could not let the king of Shu kill him. He wanted to let Her Majesty see that there were times when her judgment was wrong. So what if it was Jiang of Silla? So what if it was the left emissary? In the end, didn't they still fall into his hands? Fong Yi thought to himself. When he rushed to the city gate, he looked left and right, but did not see anyone around the city wall that he was hoping to see. He had an agreement with the spies in the city. If the city gate was opened, they would stand outside the city wall and nothing would go wrong. Otherwise, something unexpected had happened. He stopped in his tracks almost instantly, and once again confirmed that there was no one around the city wall. His expression changed drastically and he said anxiously, "Retreat, retreat quickly." He turned around quickly and the two men in purple followed closely behind him. In an instant they disappeared into the dense forest. The momentum of 3,000 people was so great that only a few dozen people who were closest to him could react. Most of the people had already rushed into the city. At this moment the king of Shu had already rushed in. His face was full of excitement as he shouted, "Follow me to the Jiang of Scylla's residence and capture Li Yi alive. There's no need to go through so much trouble, I'm right here." A voice came from above. Suddenly dozens of flames appeared on the city wall. Li Yi stood at the brightest spot on the city wall, looked at the king of Shu and said, "Come up here." Looking at the figure on the city wall that he could not see clearly, but he felt a sense of familiarity from the depths of his soul, the king of Shu's expression froze. Chapter 1024. Bang. After a heavy sound, the gate of the shopping mall which was originally open was closed. With the light of the fire, one could see that above the city wall were rows of densely packed arrows. In other words, they were surrounded by people. Seeing the densely packed figures on the city wall, especially the faintly discernible face in the fire that he would never forget, the king of Shu's expression changed drastically. He spat out the name through gritted teeth. "I said to be careful of spies." Wang Wei led 1,000 people to block the city gate that they had just entered from. He looked at the king of Shu and shook his head. "Your Highness, look, I didn't overthink, did I? 100 people go and capture Envoy Feng." Wang Wei looked back. Although he didn't know how Envoy Feng saw through them and escaped without entering the city, he couldn't let this big fish escape after planning for so long. Immediately, some people went out of the city gate while the rest closed the city gate. The king of Shu was stunned. After a long time he came back to his senses and looked at him. His eyes widened and he said in disbelief, I'm sorry, I'm a spy." Wang Wei looked at him and said, "Your Highness, give up your fearless resistance and surrender." Beside the king of Shu, several people immediately shouted, "Protect His Highness." They looked around and said loudly, "Everyone, don't panic. We have the numbers. Follow me and kill our way out." "Kill our way out?" Wang Wei looked at them and weighed something in his hand. He said, "Do you know what this is? This is heavenly punishment. As long as I throw this out with a boom you will F*ck who the F*ck ignited it." Seeing that the fuse of the thing in his hand was about to burn out, Wang Wei hurriedly threw the heavenly punishment out. Boom. Although he threw it at the corner of the wall, and the heavenly punishment was a low-quality version with limited power, more than 10 people in the king of Shu's group who were closest to it fell to the ground, moaning in pain. The fire in his eyes had yet to dissipate, and his ears were buzzing, mixed with the moans of the people around him. The power of the heavenly punishment made it so that no one dared to act rashly. "If anyone dares to resist, I'll let you have a taste of heavenly punishment." Countless figures had already come down from the city wall, and a dense wave of arrows was aimed at the people in the middle of the open space. The king of Shu's face turned pale in an instant. There were originally 3,000 people in the allied army, but because there was a spy in the middle, it suddenly became 2,000 people. They foolishly rushed into the city gate, but were surrounded here like dumplings, unable to advance or retreat. "Put down your weapons and surrender immediately. Fight for leniency. If you resist, kill without mercy." Wang Wei held a paper tube in his hand and shouted, "Those who surrender stand on the left. Those who don't stand on the right. Everyone move, follow me and kill." Someone in the crowd had just said a few words when an arrow shot out from the front and hit him right between the eyebrows. The man fell to the ground and the people around him immediately scattered. Seeing this, Wang Wei's voice became cold as he said, "If you resist again, you will be punished by the heavens. Everyone, don't be afraid. We have the advantage in numbers. Follow me and kill." Among the crowd, another person revealed a fierce expression. However, just as he finished speaking, there was a commotion beside him. He saw that the surrounding people were avoiding him as if he was the plague and distanced themselves from him. Everyone knew that they were surrounded here and there was no way out. As long as the people above kept shooting arrows, they would be easily taken care of. Not to mention that the other party had the heavenly punishment divine weapon, which was extraordinarily powerful. If the other party threw one over, wouldn't they be implicated? At the city gate, Wang Wei had already lit an incense stick. He continued to raise his megaphone and shouted, "Those who surrender stand on the left. Those who don't surrender stand on the right. Move, all of you, move. You only have 5 minutes. After that, immediately release the arrows. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a clamor of footsteps from the crowd. Wang Wei looked at the dense crowd and shouted, "Yes, just like that. Put down your weapons, put your hands behind your head and squat." Not only did they not have the advantage in numbers, but they were also surrounded by the other party. Emissary Fong of the right was nowhere to be seen, and the holy religion was without a leader. Under Wang Wei's coercion, they could only stand on the left. After the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, the king of Shu looked at the remaining people around him and murmured, "They're gone, they're all gone." Li Yi came down from the city wall and walked to the king of Shu. The king of Shu looked at the few people around him and then at the bald men pointing arrows at them. His gaze finally stopped on Li Yi. At this time it had been less than 4 years since they first met. He still remembered that their first meeting was at the Cold Mountain Temple. In the second year of Jing He's reign, the plum blossoms in the Cold Mountain Temple were in full bloom. He stood together with Zhou Xian, whom he hated the most. From that time on he didn't like this scholar of the Jing kingdom, who had just made a name for himself. At that time he was still the king of Shu, the prince closest to that position. He disregarded his feud with Zhou Xian and condescended to invite him to a banquet at the king's mansion. But what about him? He and Zhou Xian made a mess of his banquet, making him a laughing stock in the circle of the nobles in the capital. Then he beat him up in the palace in front of all the court officials, seriously injuring him, and continued to get away with it. Then he uprooted his power in the court one by one. He drove him out of the capital. He made him get further and further away from that position, the position that he had dreamed of for more than 20 years. Then he extinguished his last shred of hope. The Cui family fell, his mother died, he became a fugitive, and he became the Jiang of Silla. He took over his fief and his mansion. Now he had finally found a chance to wash away the shame he had suffered. However, Li Yi was standing right in front of him. They had never been so close to each other, nor had they been so far away from each other. The moment he met Li Yi, he missed his whole life. How good would it have been if he hadn't met Li Yi in the winter when the plum blossoms were in full bloom in the second year of Jinghe? However, there were no ifs. Cough, cough. The king of Shu bent over and couldn't stop coughing. He covered his mouth, but blood still seeped out from between his fingers. He suddenly pulled out a saber from the waist of a guard beside him and slashed at Li Yi. A crazed look appeared on his face. Li Yi, I'm going to kill you." Li Yi pinched the tip of the saber. No matter how much strength the king of Shu used, the long saber couldn't move an inch. He exerted a little force and the saber flew out of the king of Shu's hand. He casually threw it to the ground, making a crisp clang sound. The king of Shu's body fell limply to the ground. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He lowered his head and panted heavily. "Ha, you traitors, I am the emperor. How dare you rebel?" At a certain moment he suddenly raised his head and pointed at Li Yi. He took a few deep breaths and his face was no longer pale. Instead it turned rosy. He got up from the ground, put one hand on his waist and laughed wildly. "Li Yi Jiang of Silla, you are just a prince. Why don't you kneel before me? Treason, you are treason. I want to punish you for your crimes, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to exterminate your entire family." Li Yi looked at the crazed king of Shu and shook his head. He waved his hand and said, "Take him away. Don't touch me." The expression on the king of Shu's face became terrified. He shouted, "You unruly people, where is the imperial army, Guards. These unruly people want to harm me." Chapter 1025. On the morning of the 12th day of the first lunar month, Butcher Zheng opened the door with dark circles under his eyes and saw the waiter of the restaurant across the street sitting listlessly on the threshold. Butcher Zheng glanced at him and said, "Hey Gooden, what did you do last night? Why are you so sleepy?" The waiter glanced at him and said weakly, "How dare you say that? If your wife hadn't screamed last night, the whole street would have heard her. How could I be so sleepy? If you two do that again next time, it's none of your business whether my wife screamed or not. Why can't you sleep?" Butcher Zheng looked at him with a dark face and asked, "Next time? What do you want to do next time?" The waiter named Gooden was stunned. He looked at him and asked in surprise, "Can I?" Butcher Jing picked up a boning knife and tilted his ear, asking, Come over here and tell me what you want to do. I just want to tell you that you must have public morality. Do you want me and my neighbors to go and play drums and cheer for you next time? The waiter shook his head. Butcher Zheng's wife was stronger than him. Even looking at Butcher Zheng was more interesting than looking at his wife. He stood up and said angrily, I don't know who it was last night who set off firecrackers in the middle of the night. It was so loud that I felt the bed move. I was woken up just as I fell asleep. Don't let me catch that bastard. If I do, I'll skin him alive. Butcher Zheng didn't care about the guy who set off firecrackers last night. He was also angry with that bastard. Yesterday he was preparing to have a baby with his wife. At the critical moment he was scared out of his wits by the sound of firecrackers. Later he found his wits, but he was lost. He was only allowed to go to bed after being kicked a few times by his wife who hadn't had enough fun. Speaking of that person, Butcher Zheng was enraged. He waved the knife in his hand and said angrily, If I catch him, I'll cut his bones. Last night many people in Yong County didn't sleep well, especially those near the West City Gate. A few days ago, when there was no curfew, everyone's nightlife would last until very late. These days, after the curfew, as soon as the sky turned dark, it was time to sleep. But regardless of whether they were sleeping or sleeping, they were all startled by the loud noise that occurred around midnight last night. The sound was so loud that even the ground beneath their feet shook. The first impression it gave people was that the sky had collapsed. Some people even mistakenly thought that it was an earth dragon turning over and hurriedly ran out of their houses. They stayed outside for most of the night and only dared to walk back into their rooms after seeing that nothing was out of place. During the day, everything returned to normal. The shops opened for business and the commoners continued with their daily activities. Observant people would notice that a part of the city wall in the shopping mall was slightly charred, as if it had been burned. Most people only cursed the fellow who had fired the cannon in their hearts. Wang Wei didn't realize that he was responsible for firing the cannon last night. He stood in front of Li Yi, shook his head and said with some regret, Prince, the rest of the people from the holy religion have been captured. 2 of the purple-clothed emissaries escaped, and that emissary Fong of the right has also escaped. I've already sent my brothers to their lair. This time their elites have all gone, so it'll be easy to wipe them out. Fong rubbed his shiny head and said regretfully, Young master, I was too rash. I shouldn't have captured those fellows who opened the city gate yesterday. Otherwise, that Fong guy. Halfway through his sentence he realized that his surname was also Fong, so he added, that emissary of the right won't be able to escape. Li Yi waved his hand and said, It's all right. If he escaped, then so be it. We'll meet again in the future. Let's talk about it next time. This time he managed to capture the king of Shu and the elites of the holy religion in the fringe without losing a single soldier. He also managed to capture more than 2,000 people. What else could he be dissatisfied with? Not only did emissary Fong of the right escape, but he also left the king of Shu alive. To him, the king of Shu was obviously more important than Fong Yu. Ever since he entered the capital, he and the king of Shu had never stopped fighting openly and secretly. It was only yesterday that their feud finally came to an end. However, even he didn't expect that it would end up like this. After experiencing the ups and downs of life, he never got up again. He fell many times, and when he finally got the chance to get up again, he fell from heaven to hell in an instant. The king of Shu actually went crazy. When he was taken away, he was still shouting things like, Protect the emperor, rebel, and there are always unruly people who want to harm the emperor. After he went crazy, he imagined himself to be the emperor. He had wanted to be the emperor all his life, and now his dream had finally come true. Although he was only deceiving himself, at least he succeeded. Fong touched his bald head again and asked, Son-in-law, what should we do with the king of Shu? Li Yi stood up and said, I'll go see him first. After Li Yi left, Wang Wei looked at Fong and asked, Brother Fong, is a bald head good to touch? How does it feel? Fong nodded and said, Not bad. Even if it feels good. Wang Wei removed the hand that was rubbing his head and asked, Can't you touch your own head? You're crazy. Fong glanced at him and said, If I had a bald head, would I need to touch yours? His words were eloquent and reasonable. Wang Wei opened his mouth, but he didn't know how to refute. The king of Shu was temporarily imprisoned in the manor prison. When Li Yi walked in, Qin Chong followed behind him and said, The king of Shu has been making a big fuss since last night, calling himself, we. Last night while he was asleep I had a doctor take a look at him. He said that his pulse is extremely chaotic. It should be because he suffered a huge psychological blow and his mind is injured. Perhaps he will wake up after a period of time, or perhaps he will be like this forever. How could he not be shocked? If the king of Shu had not suffered a psychological blow, then the one being imprisoned would be Li Yi himself. After saying a few words, Qin Chong looked at him and asked, "What do you plan to do with the king of Shu?" Li Yi looked at the innermost cell and said, "Send him back to the capital." In the innermost cell of the manor prison, the king of Shu placed his hands on his hips and raised his head. He looked at the people in the cell next door and said loudly, "You unruly people, why don't you kneel when you see us? Let us tell you, our reinforcements will be here soon. If you kneel before us now, we will get them to save you all in a while. Humph, you unruly people, how dare you not kneel when you see us? We will not get anyone to save you." The people in the cell next door leaned against the wall and sighed as they looked at the king of Shu, who was talking to himself. How could a normal person go crazy just like that? The king of Shu turned around angrily and suddenly saw a familiar figure. After a moment of shock, he immediately laughed wildly and said, Lord Qin, you're here. Are you here to save us?" "Ah, you unruly people, do you see that? Our reinforcements are here. Lord Qin is here to save us. It's not too late for you to kneel before us now." Looking at the king of Shu laughing wildly in the cell, Qin Chong stopped in his tracks. The expression on his face was extremely complicated. No matter what, the Qin family had been loyal to the king of Shu for a period of time. Seeing this scene, he felt a different feeling in his heart. "Lord Qin, quickly come and save us. When we return we will make you the prime minister. Tell us what you want to be, and when we return we will make you." His gaze swept to the side, and when he saw the person standing beside Qin Chong, his expression changed drastically. He hid in a corner and shouted, "Li Yi, you traitor, you captured us, you want to rebel? Imperial father will not let you off. Imperial mother will not let you off. No one in the world will let you off." After shouting a few words, he quickly ran over and grabbed the bars. With a face full of anticipation, he said, Li Yi, let me go. Let me go, please. Don't you remember? Have you forgotten that I treated you to a meal? I even treated you to a meal." Seeing the king of Shu like this, Li Yi's heart was also filled with mixed feelings. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have done it in the first place. He just wanted to live a good life, Rui and the others. Whether the king of Shu became the emperor or not had nothing to do with him. If not for that meal, if not for Qin Yu, perhaps the two of them would not have such an ending today. The king of Shu knelt on the ground and said loudly, Li Yi, let me go. Whatever you want, I can give it to you." At some point, a look of understanding appeared on his face and he said loudly, I know what you want. This emperor will give it to you, this emperor will give it to you, this emperor will give it to you. Release this emperor. This emperor will immediately add an edict for Mingzhu to marry you. Let me go. Not only will I let Mingzhu marry you, I will also let Li Xian marry you. Chapter 1026. Li Yi looked at Qin Chong, who was staring at him with a strange gaze, and explained, "Don't look at me like that. His Majesty and I are innocent." "And with the princess?" "With the princess, it's just holding hands and kissing the cheek. So, there's nothing else." "I know." Qin Chong nodded. "You and His Majesty are innocent." Li Yi looked at him and said, "But the look in your eyes hasn't changed." Qin Chong lowered his head and said nothing. Of all the officials in court, only he and His Majesty believed that they were innocent. Everyone knew that His Majesty and Jiang of Silla were as close as brothers, and that His Majesty favored him even more than Her Majesty the Empress. Who would believe that they were innocent? But he could not say this in front of Qin Chong. Based on his understanding of Li Yi, if he bore a grudge against you, he would not fall out with you on the surface, but he would make things difficult for you in the future. Everyone knew of His Highness Jiang of Silla's pettiness, just like his relationship with His Majesty. He changed his gaze and said, "The king of Shu is like this. How can I bring him back to the capital?" Qin Chong's words were reasonable. The king of Shu had been a respectable person before he went crazy. It would be too shameful to have him return to the capital like this. It would not only hurt the king of Shu's own face, but also the face of the imperial family. Li Yi ordered the jailer behind him, "Open the prison door." The jailer did not ask any questions and went forward to open the door. Thank you." The king of Shu walked out and said seriously, I will send Emmingzu to your room today, and the day after tomorrow I will send Li Xian. Thump. Li Yi reached out and lightly chopped at the king of Shu's neck. The king fell to the ground. This is much more respectable. Li Yi looked at Qin Chong and said, don't delay this matter. Tomorrow secretly escort him back to the capital. If he continues to make trouble on the way, just knock him out. Qin Chong was startled, then nodded. Okay. He pointed at the unconscious king of Shu and ordered the jailer, bring him back first. Why did he go crazy? The jailer sighed. The king of Shu, who was lying on the ground, suddenly jumped up and grabbed him by the neck. He said angrily, I'm not crazy. I'm the emperor. I'm the ruler of a country. You unruly people, unruly people. Bang. Qin Chong chopped down on the king of Shu's neck with even greater force than Li Yi's. The king of Shu fell to the ground again. Qin Chong waved his hand and said, take him away. Son-in-law, do you think the madness of the king of Shu is real? Fong squatted on the ground, looked at Li Yi and asked, it's said that there are people who are unwilling to remember certain things because they suffered a blow, so they sealed a part of their memories. Sounds very mysterious. Is there really such a thing? Really, Li Yi said casually. Although this kind of thing sounded mysterious, it was not uncommon in the history of medicine. It was no longer important whether the king of Shu was really crazy or not. Based on Li Xian's style of doing things, he might not kill the king of Shu. However, the king of Shu would not be able to leave the capital in this lifetime. As for the one imprisoned in the capital, what difference did it make whether the king of Shu was really crazy or not? Now that the matter with the king of Shu had come to an end, he was thinking about other matters. This time the king of Shu was captured and Fong Yu escaped. They had already taken over the fringe. However, they still could not find Fong Yu. When they arrived, the fringe was already deserted. Only a few bandits who were captured were left behind. The fringe was huge. Even if the king of Shu, Fong Yu and the others joined forces, they could only occupy a small piece of land. Of course, no matter which side they were on, they were still one of the few major powers in the fringe. Now the territories near the Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom had been unified by them. Only some major powers in the north near the Wu Kingdom had yet to be conquered. Li Yi, Wang Wei and the others discussed for a while and decided not to make a move so soon. They would wait until they had stabilized their current territories before advancing. When that time came, the fringe would have to change its surname. Whether it was Li or Lu, it was all the same. Moreover, the surname Lu would eventually belong to the surname Li. These details could be ignored for the time being. Fong squatted on the ground. He was waiting for Li Yi to explain to him. However, Li Yi only gave a perfunctory reply and did not say anything else. He had already noticed that the young master did not seem to like to talk to him recently. Thinking about it carefully, other than the time when the princess sent a letter to Mississippi Lu, he did not offend him in any way. He thought for a moment and took out a letter from his sleeve. He said, young master, actually the princess sent me a letter today. I didn't let second miss see it. Li Yi quietly hid the letter in his sleeve. He did not know why, but when he looked at Fong again, he found him much more pleasing to the eye. Not bad. You did a good job this time. He patted Fong's shoulder and quietly returned to his room. He closed the door and leaned against it. He couldn't wait to take out the letter from his sleeve. He had been waiting for this letter from Emmingzu for a long time. On the cover there were 4 big words, to Li Yi. Li Yi was startled and his face darkened. He glared fiercely at the door. This Fong, is he stupid? This is a letter from Emmingzu, not from Mississippi Lu. Why is he acting so secretive? It's like he's meeting with an underground gang. What's there to be afraid of when it's his own letter? Li Yi was stunned when he opened the letter. There was no letter paper. There was no letter paper in the envelope. Could it be that when she sent the letter she forgot to put the content in it? Li Yi's eyes were a little moist. It was not easy for him to wait for a letter from her. It had been 9 months. He was about to marry Zumo Ruoqing, but he only waited for such a letter, and it was a letter without content. Did she let him imagine it himself? He turned the envelope over and over, but still did not find the content of the letter. But he found a bunch of hair in the envelope. This hair should not have been put in accidentally because it was not one or a few strands, but a bunch tied with a red band. It was not long and one end was the tip of the hair and the other end was cut very neatly. It should have been cut with a sharp tool such as scissors. It was very strange for Emmingzu to write a letter. Last time she sent a beating and asked Rui to do it. This time she sent a bunch of hair. Why didn't she send a kiss and ask Rui to do it? Li was about to sit down and study it. After taking 2 steps, he saw Rui sitting at the desk holding a book in his hand and looking at him. He was stunned and asked, "Rui, when did you come here?" "It's been an hour." Mississippi Lu put down the book in her hand, looked at him and asked, "What's in your hand?" Li looked down at it, then looked at her and said, "A letter." Mississippi Lu asked, "Li Emming's sent it?" Li was surprised and said, "How do you know?" "When Uncle Fong secretly gave it to you just now, I heard it." Li straightened the envelope and pointed at the words for Li on it. He said solemnly, "You see, this time it's for me. I didn't peek at your letter." Mississippi Lu nodded and asked, "What did she say?" Then she added, "Of course, if it's something private I won't ask. After all, I'm not like some people who have a hobby of prying into other people's privacy." Li didn't like what she said. What did she mean by having a hobby of prying into other people's privacy? That was concern. Concern was to help her and Emmingzu establish the right outlook on life, values and the world. She didn't want them to go astray. What's so good about prying into other people's privacy? You'll get beaten for prying into other people's privacy. It was obvious that she wanted to know, but she pretended that she didn't care. Ha women, what privacy? In order to prove his innocence, Li handed over the envelope and said, "There's no privacy between us. You can take a look." Mississippi Lu took the envelope, opened it and looked at Li. Li looked at the empty envelope and was stunned. After a while he looked at her and asked, "If I say that she didn't say anything and there's no letter in this envelope, would you believe me?" Chapter 10:27. There's no letter in this letter. Do you believe me? Li looked at Mississippi Lu with a sincere expression. Other than the tongue twister that almost made him bite his tongue, he did not seem to be faking it at all. Because he was not faking it at all. Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, "Are you talking about tongue twisters?" "Speaking of tongue twisters, I've actually studied them some time ago." Li thought for a moment and said, 800 soldiers rushed to the north slope. Red carp and green carp and donkey. Black fertilizer evaporates and turns black. Gray fertilizer evaporates and turns black. Gray fertilizer evaporates and turns black. Yes, play. Li stopped talking about tongue twisters because he just bit his tongue and it hurt. Mississippi Lu shook her head and said, "I know there's nothing in that letter. I saw it just now. I'm just joking." She stood up and picked up the book she was reading just now. She said, "By the way, lend this book to me for 2 days. I'll return it to you when I'm done." "What book?" Li asked casually. "Qin Shimi and Qin Xianglian." Mississippi Lu waved her hand and said, "It's about the ungrateful Qin Shimi who married a princess and abandoned his wife. In the end he was killed by Master Bao. This kind of ungrateful, fickle person." Li found that Mississippi Lu's use of idioms was getting better and better. But that was not the main point. The main point was that she only needed to tell him what book she had borrowed. He wrote the script himself. Didn't he know what kind of story Qin Shimi and Qin Xianglian was about? Did he ask her what the book was about? A woman. Cough, cough. Seeing Mississippi Lu's gaze, Li coughed twice and walked over. He took a book from the table and handed it to her. He said, "If you have time you should read this book. It's quite good. Girls should read more." Mississippi Lu reached out and took it. She asked, "What book is this?" "A Huangyan Nuing." Li looked at her and explained, "This book is about Emperor Yao having 2 daughters. The elder sister is a Huang and the younger sister is Nuing. Both sisters follow the teachings of the court, nurturing themselves and are pure in nature. One is gentle and virtuous, beautiful and intelligent, while the other is unruly, unreasonable and barbaric. They are both sisters, but why is the difference between them so big?" Seeing the change in Mississippi Lu's gaze, Li hurriedly said, "Of course none of this is important. What's important is... What's important?" Mississippi Lu continued to ask. "I forgot." Li sat in front of the desk and said, "It's boring to listen to others talk about it. It's better for you to see for yourself." Mississippi Lu turned around and walked out of the room. As she walked out of the room, Li suddenly remembered something and quickly said, "Rui, wait a minute." Mississippi Lu turned around and looked at him. Li thought for a moment and asked, "Rui, if you are a woman, what does it mean to give someone a bunch of hair?" Soon drunk Emo and Ruoqing would enter the door. Li Xian could not come, but he did not forget the gift. According to what he said in the letter, it was a generous gift, but Emingzu only gave a bunch of hair. This was too unkind. Hair wishing that he would have a good start in the new year? Black hair tied to the hair, forever tied to the same heart. When a woman gives her hair to a man, it means that she has fallen in love with him. When a husband and wife get married, they also have to tie the hair. Mississippi Lu explained, looked at him and asked, "Why did a woman give you hair?" Li put his left hand behind his back, shook his head and said solemnly, No, how could it be?" Fong watched the son-in-law walk into the room with the letter and close the door. After a while the door opened and second Miss came out from inside. Her eyes suddenly widened. After a while, Li came out from inside with a sullen face, looked at Fong and said, "Emingzu wrote the letter to me, not to Rui. Does it matter if she read it or not? Do you need to be so sneaky? Are you stupid? Son-in-law, can you read the letter from Princess Royal to second Miss? Can you not read the letter from Princess Royal to second Miss? Son-in-law, don't you know in your heart?" Fong rolled his eyes, looked at Li Yi and asked, "Son-in-law, who is stupid?" After listening to Fong's words, Li Yi's heart suddenly sank. His IQ was even lower than Fong's. He couldn't read the letter that Emingzu wrote to Rui, but Rui couldn't not read the letter that Emingzu wrote to him. So no matter who the letter was written to, as long as it was written by Emingzu, he had to hide it from her secretly. Li Yi looked at Fong. Even he understood the logic, but he didn't think of it immediately. He suddenly felt an unprecedented heartache. "There's another letter here. I forgot to give it to you just now." Fong took out another envelope from his sleeve and handed it to Li Yi. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Whose is this?" Fong shook his head and said, "I don't know. There's no name on it. It was sent with the princess letter. Although there's no recipient, it's definitely for son-in-law." Li Yi reached out to take it and he was stunned. The envelope was bulging and it was thicker than the two scripts that Mississippi Lu had just taken away. Could it be that Li Xian had written the problems that he had encountered into a book? This D*Nedman, did he really think that he was Baidu? Even Baidu wasn't that convenient. There was no signature on the letter, but according to Li Xian's style of doing things, Li Yi felt that his guess was most likely correct. He instantly lost the urge to open the envelope. He put the envelope aside, looked at the bundle of hair in his hand and fell into deep thought. What did Emingzu mean by sending him a bundle of hair? Was it to congratulate him on getting rich in the new year, or was there something else? As for what Mississippi Lu said about being together forever, he didn't really believe it. This was something that only young girls would do. It was possible that Xianxia would do it, but for Emingzu, what if that was what she meant? Li Yi couldn't figure it out no matter how he thought about it. He couldn't help but complain in his heart. What did she want to say? Couldn't she have written it more clearly? A woman's mind was the hardest to guess. Then he tore open the envelope on the table. Since he had nothing else to do, he would reluctantly solve two of Li Xian's problems. There was indeed a book in the envelope. To be precise, it was a thick book. The cover was blank and there were no words. Li Yi sat on the chair, crossed his legs and opened the first page. The handwriting on the paper was neat and beautiful, and it was pleasing to the eye. "Sir, I thought for a long time and I still decided to write to you." Since he left the capital city, there was only one person who still called him sir. Seeing the first sentence, Li Yi put down his crossed legs and sat up straight. The relaxed expression on his face gradually became serious. Fong squatted at the side, glanced at him and quietly squatted a little further away. When Li Yi put the thick letter on the table, he moved a little further away and stopped at the door. "A few days before I wrote to Sir, the plum blossoms in the cold mountain temple bloomed again. My royal sister took me to see it once. The people in the capital city all said that this was the year when the plum blossoms in the cold mountain temple bloomed the most. It's a pity that my painting isn't as good as Sir's. Otherwise, I could draw this year's plum blossoms and keep it for you to see when you come back." Her handwriting was neat from beginning to end, and it could be seen how serious she was when she wrote the letter. The letter was very long and trivial. On one page she would write how beautiful the plum blossoms in the cold mountain temple were, and on another page she would write about the death of the old man who bought candy figurines on the street, and she had been sad for a long time. On another page she would write about what she had seen in the academy, and at some point she would mention that she was now in charge of the women's union, and there were many things she didn't know how to do and she was learning slowly. Li Yi could feel her mood from her words, her joy, anger, sorrow and joy as if she were by his side. He held up the letter that could already be called a book, and carefully read word by word, line by line and page by page. His eyebrows gradually relaxed and a smile unconsciously appeared on his face. When Su Jing walked in from outside, he was stopped by Fong at the door. Fong looked back at the figure who had been sitting quietly in the courtyard for a long time, and whispered, "Don't disturb him." Chapter 1028. Squatting at the door, Fong glanced at Su Jing, who was waiting there quietly, and said, "Old Su, why are you looking for the son-in-law? Tell me. Maybe I can think of a way so there's no need to trouble him. The son-in-law is busy all day, so it's better not to make trouble for him." Su Jing just looked at him indifferently and said nothing. "Hey, why are you looking at me like that? Are you looking down on me?" Fong straightened up and looked at him with a slightly angry expression. "Although I'm not as smart as the son-in-law, I'm not far behind. Sometimes the son-in-law isn't as smart as me. Tell me what's the matter. I'll help you think of a way." Su Jing looked at him and said, "We have a goddess and a protector, and the other side also has a goddess and a protector. In terms of numbers, we don't have the advantage. Most of the captive believers are from the Qi kingdom, and many of them are unwilling to surrender." After saying that, he looked at Fong and asked, "What's your idea?" In Fong's eyes, there was no normal person in the holy religion except for the son-in-law and Miss Ruoqing. No, except for Miss Ruoqing there was no normal person. Including Su Jing in front of him, no one knew what was going on in their minds. They were extremely paranoid and crazy. They were a group of lunatics. What could he do to a bunch of lunatics like this? Was he supposed to press their heads and make them submit to him? Seeing that Su Jing was still looking at him, Fong glared at him and said, "What are you looking at me for?" Su Jing said, "I'm waiting for your idea." "Why are you waiting for my idea? Whether they are willing to surrender or not, does it have anything to do with me?" Fong glanced at him and asked, "You still have to ask me this kind of question. What are you doing as a purple envoy?" Su Jing was a very serious person. He looked at him and said, "You just said you could think of a way." Fong thought for a moment, then suddenly looked at him and asked, "How old are you this year?" Su Jing looked at him and said, 28. "Do you have an in-laws?" Fong asked again. "No." Fong pointed at him and said somewhat exasperatedly, "You're already 28 years old and you're about to reach your 30s. You don't even have a wife. When I was 28, my son could already work in the fields. You don't want to pass on the incense to your Su family. What's the use of thinking about all this nonsense all day?" Su Jing looked at him and asked, "What's the use of having a mother-in-law? Is it to be afraid like you?" When Li Yi walked out of the courtyard, he saw Fong lift Su Jing up with one hand and was about to throw him into the lotus pond in front. "What are you doing?" Only when Fong heard the voice did he put Su Jing down. Su Jing straightened his collar, his expression unchanged as he said, "There are hundreds of believers who are still unwilling to surrender. Most of them are from the Qi kingdom. Our influence in the Qi kingdom is not as great as theirs." The holy religion was now clearly divided into two parts. One was the Qi kingdom branch with Daoist nun as its concubine, and the other was the Jing kingdom branch with Ruoqing as its concubine. The Daoist nun's influence in the Jing kingdom was not as great as that of Ruoqing, and Ruoqing's importance in the hearts of the believers in the Qi kingdom was not as great as that of Daoist nun. Now that there was a conflict between the two concubines and they needed to take sides, there would be two completely different choices. "I understand." Li Yi nodded and said, "You can go now. I have my own way of dealing with this matter." Su Jing cupped his hands in obeisance and simply turned to leave. Fong stared at Li Yi with wide eyes and asked curiously, "What is your way, son-in-law?" He really couldn't figure it out. They didn't want to believe him, so what could he do? Could the son-in-law control what they were thinking? According to his experience, when the son-in-law said he had a way, he really did have a way. This was different from him. It seemed that the son-in-law was indeed a little smarter than him. He had to face this fact. For Li Yi, the problem of the believers of the holy religion was not simple, but it was not difficult either. As long as he found the right problem and applied the right medicine, he would soon see results. At present, the first thing on his mind was the upcoming wedding. When the officials and nobles in the capital married concubines, they would quietly carry them into the house in a sedan chair. They wouldn't make too much of a fuss. At most, they would invite some relatives and friends to get together. Li Yi also didn't intend to make the whole Shuzhou bustling. He didn't intend to announce it with great fanfare, nor did he want to invite the officials of Shuzhou. Although he could receive a lot of gifts, did he care about these things? However, it couldn't be too simple. After all, for women this was one of the most important things in their lives. Whether it was Zuamo or Ruoqing, they couldn't be wronged. Of course, seriously speaking, this was also his first marriage, so he had to take it seriously if the last time he was knocked unconscious didn't count. He walked into the room. Rui was looking at the clothes in the wardrobe and worrying. Seeing him come in, she hurriedly pulled him over and asked, "Husband, what do you think I should wear on the day my two sisters marry?" Li Yi was dazzled by the clothes in her wardrobe and said, "My wife looks good in anything." Rui shook her head and said, "That won't do. I have to choose one." Li Yi closed the wardrobe, put his arm around her waist and said, "There's no need to choose. I've already chosen the clothes you want to wear on that day." "Which one?" Rui asked in confusion. Li Yi led her to the bed, opened a box at the head of the bed and rummaged out a piece of clothing. He said, "Just wear this." Rui was stunned, and then she shook her head and said, "Don't talk nonsense, husband. How can I wear this? Because I haven't seen my wife in this dress." Li Yi put the wedding dress on the bed, held her in his arms and said, "Last time I got married in a daze. Later I thought about it. How can I be so careless about marriage? So this time I want to marry again." Li Yi looked at her and asked, "My wife, are you willing to marry again?" "Husband, Dwainer is already 2 years old." Rui looked at him with a red face and whispered, "If we do this, others will laugh. I'll see who dares to laugh." "No way." Li Yi moved closer to her ear, sucked her earlobe and asked softly, "Can I?" Rui's soft body collapsed in his arms and her cheeks were red. She said as if she was sleep-talking, "Yes." When Xiao Huan passed by the courtyard, she stopped and turned back to take a curious look. Why was the door of the young master and the young lady's room closed again? It was clearly open just now. When Li Yi walked into another small courtyard, Xiao Cui was playing happily under the sun with a prism. Among Xiao Huan, Xiao Zhu and Xiao Cui, she was the best at playing. She was the best at playing shuttlecock, and she was also the best at playing kickboxing. She could even play more tricks than others. At this moment she was showing Fong the phenomenon of using a prism to make a rainbow under the sun. Fong was obviously not interested in making a rainbow. He squatted beside her and whispered, "Xiao Cui, I have something to discuss with you." "What's the matter, Uncle Fong?" Xiao Cui adjusted the angle of the prism and asked casually. Fong looked at her and said, "You see, you call Xiao Hong sister and I call you Uncle Fong. Between these two, is there a gap in seniority?" Xiao Cui couldn't change the way she called him. This was a sore point in his heart. Other people wanted to raise their seniority, but he just wanted her to call him Big Brother Fong. Was this request too much? Xiao Cui raised her head and blinked her eyes. She asked, "What do you mean?" "You see, your Xiao Hong sister is with me now. We are of the same generation." Fong looked at her and said patiently, "You call me Uncle Fong and you call her Xiao Hong sister. Is there a gap in seniority?" Xiao Cui thought about it and came to a realization. She nodded and said, "It seems so." She looked at Fong and said seriously, "I'm sorry, I won't call you that in the future." Lao Fong suddenly felt tears welling up in his eyes and his nose tingling. It had been 3 years, almost 3 years. She was finally enlightened. Xiao Cui looked at him and said sincerely, "Uncle Fong, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I'll call her Aunt Xiao Hong from now on." Seeing Fong standing there in a daze with tears in his eyes, Xiao Cui was startled and asked, Uncle Fong, what's wrong?" "It's nothing." Fong wiped his eyes and looked up at the sky. He said, "The sun today is a little poisonous. My eyes hurt and I'm tearing up." Xiao Cui looked up and said doubtfully, "The sun today is not poisonous. Not poisonous." Fong lowered his head and shook it. He said, "That's because I thought of my dead mother." "Ah?" Fong wiped his eyes and sighed. If she didn't die, she would be living a happy life now. Chapter 1029. Li Yi could see that Fong was a little confused. Otherwise, he would not have made such a helpless, pained and disheartened expression. Even when he thought of his mother who had died early before she could enjoy her happiness, he would not have been like this. "Miss and Sister Ruoqing are in the room. Son-in-law, you can go in by yourself." Xiao Cui continued to play with her prism. Since the matter with drunken Mo and Ruoqing was settled, she had changed the way she addressed herself. This was learned from Xiao Huan. Later Xiaozhu also followed suit. Li walked into the room. Xiao Chui had already made a rainbow. Looking at Fong, she said proudly, "Uncle Fong, look, isn't it beautiful? I can also use other methods to make a rainbow." Sister Xiao Chui? Lao Fong looked at her and said seriously, "I'm calling you sister. Can you let me finish talking?" Xiao Chui put down the prism, shook her head and said shyly, "Uncle Fong, you are too polite. I am much younger than you." Drunken Mo and Ruoqing were both in the room. The two sat by the bed on which there were two neatly arranged wedding dresses. Drunken Mo generously pointed to the bed and said, "Sister Ruoqing, which one do you want? Take your pick." Ruoqing looked at her and said doubtfully, "But you embroidered all these." Drunken Mo frowned and said, "So what if I embroidered it? Didn't I say long ago that my things are your things? Why do we need to separate yours and mine?" Li Yi stood behind them and asked, "What about me?" Drunken Mo looked back, rolled her eyes at him and said, "You are not a thing." Li Yi did not know whether she was saying that he was good or bad, so he was pushed out by her. Drunken Mo pushed him out of the door and said, "I am discussing an important matter with Sister Ruoqing. You can come in later." Looking at the closed door, Li Yi shook his head. Wasn't it just discussing who was going to wear which wedding dress? Was there any difference? So what if she wore it? When the time came, she would still have to take it off. He walked to the side and decided to watch Emerald perform her magic for a while. Using a Mitsubishi mirror to create a rainbow was the most basic. Advanced players like Emerald had already mastered the method of creating a rainbow. As long as the weather was right, they could create a rainbow using a homemade sprayer, a basin of water and a mirror. In the room, Drunk Ink looked at Ruoqing and said, "Although you didn't embroider it yourself, there's no time to embroider it now. Fortunately, I'm thoughtful. Just make do with it, don't bother about these things." Ruoqing shook her head and said, "I'm not fussing over it. You know, it's not easy for me to wear this dress. I know you're the Empress. You can't let them see the Empress wearing a wedding dress." Drunk Ink looked at her and asked, "But do you think they will let you wear a wedding dress?" Hearing this, Ruoqing blushed inexplicably and whispered, "I can wear it in private. You don't need to wear it in private." Drunk Ink pressed her shoulder and let her sit on the bed. "You don't have to worry about these things. Who cares about the Empress? You just have to be your bride in peace." She took off her shoes and socks and jumped onto the bed. "Don't hesitate. Put it on first. This is the first time in my life that I'm wearing a wedding dress." Ruoqing had no choice but to agree. Soon, in the room, in front of a dressing mirror that was as tall as a person, there were two more brides. Both of them were already very beautiful, and now that they were wearing wedding dresses, it added a bit of soul-stirring charm. Drunk Ink looked at the mirror for a long time before snorting softly. That guy got lucky. When she and Ruoqing sat back on the bed, she seemed to think of something and suddenly looked at Ruoqing. "What's wrong?" Ruoqing was a little confused by her gaze and looked at her. Drunk Ink was startled and suddenly asked, "Although we married at the same time, there has to be a sequence. Tell me who came first and who came last." "Of course it's you first." There was no need to hesitate on this question. To be exact, it was Drunk Ink who met him first and they were also together first. "I'll go first." Drunk Ink suddenly revealed an inexplicable smile on her face. She looked at her and asked, "Then does little Ruoqing have to call me big sister?" Ruoqing looked up at her and finally seemed to understand something, and her face became even redder. Drunk Ink couldn't help but laugh heartily and pushed her down on the bed. "I've called you big sister for more than 10 years and now I can finally turn things around. Little Ruoqing, quickly call me big sister." Ruoqing's face was crimson and she gritted her teeth. "No." Drunk Ink snorted coldly. "No, if you don't blame me for punishing you. Does anyone need my help?" Li Yi stood by the window and asked as he watched the two people rolling on the bed. Whether it was to help Ruoqing resist Drunk Ink or to help Drunk Ink punish Ruoqing, he could help. Bang. Looking at the tightly closed window, Li Yi shook his head and turned to walk back to the yard. Drunk Ink and Ruoqing didn't bring him out, Rui and Emingzi didn't bring him out, Rui and Xiaohuan didn't bring him out for a bath, and he actually degenerated to watch Xiao Chui turn into a rainbow with Fong. The Shu King's Mansion. The Shu King's Mansion was no longer the Shu King's Mansion. At best, it could only be called the former site of the Shu King's Mansion. In a spacious hall, the door was closed and the windows were closed from the outside. Hundreds of people were crowded in the hall, and most of them sat quietly on the ground, expressionless. Envoy Su, don't waste your effort anymore. The person sitting at the very front opened his eyes and looked at the young man standing in front of him. He said, I'll also give you a piece of advice. You and I shouldn't interfere in the affairs of the two goddesses. Otherwise, we'll be punished by the gods and die without a burial place. Fong, who was leaning against the pillar, curled his lips. What *t divine punishment, that could make people die without a burial place. That was called divine punishment. Su Jing looked at him and said lightly, Envoy Fong of the right betrayed us and wanted to harm the concubines. You are also guilty. Although the concubines don't want to blame you if you continue to be stubborn, don't blame me for not being polite. There's no point in saying more. We will not interfere in the affairs of the two concubines, the man said lightly and closed his eyes again. Su Jing clenched his fists tightly, but he quickly relaxed them. Although the believers of the two countries had already accepted the fact that there were two concubines in the holy religion, and the believers of the Jing kingdom had all been subdued by him, it was not easy for the people of the Qi kingdom to determine who was superior between the two concubines. The concubines have arrived. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from outside the hall. In the hall, after a brief silence, everyone stood up from the ground. A young woman appeared at the door of the hall. All the believers of the holy religion knew that the Empress had two incarnations in the human world, and they also remembered the portraits of the two concubines in their hearts. The woman standing outside the door was one of the concubines, the one who represented benevolence. Greetings, concubine. Under the lead of the leader, everyone bowed to the woman at the door. No need to stand on ceremony, the woman said softly. Thank you, concubine. They looked up and saw a rainbow-colored ray of light behind the concubine. It wasn't just one but several dozens. The Empress was draped in rainbows and behind her were countless rays of light. Like a goddess, Wanru appeared in front of them. Inside the hall, all the believers were dumbfounded. Old Fong froze on the spot, pursed his lips, nudged Su Jing who was standing on the side and asked, That, your other queen, can she glow? Greetings, concubine. Su Jing didn't answer him, instead kneeling down on both knees, prostrating himself on the ground and loudly said, Greetings, concubine. All the believers in the hall knelt down at the same time, prostrating themselves on the ground. This was the highest form of etiquette of the holy religion. Just now they were greeting the incarnation of the Empress benevolence. Now they were greeting the real Empress. And the reason why they could distinguish whether the concubine in front of them was the concubine or her incarnation was because the concubine's incarnation didn't glow, nor did it emit rainbow-colored rays of light. This was the arrival of the Empress herself. Chapter 1030. Ruoqing was like an immortal. He came in a rainbow and left in a rainbow. With a wave of her sleeves she didn't take away a single cloud, but she took away the faith of many believers. Ruoqing took away their faith and Su Jing took away their bodies. These were the first batch of believers of the Qi kingdom that they had subdued, and they were the core elites of the holy religion in the Qi kingdom. These elites all prostrated before Xiao Chui's prism. Li Yi had always felt that compared to all kinds of people in the world, these fanatics were the simplest and purest. They wouldn't scheme against each other and dealing with them wasn't tiring at all. They only believed in Her Majesty. If Her Majesty wanted them to do evil, they would do evil. If Her Majesty wanted them to do good, they would do good. If they could be guided and purified compared to the filthy and chaotic court, they would be a clean stream in the world. Xiao Chui put away her prism, picked up the mirror in the water, and took away the basin of water in the courtyard. 4 high-level players, these things and 2 assistants were enough to give people a feast for the eyes. After the matter was done, she would leave in a flash, hiding her achievements and fame. Of course, she didn't really leave in a flash. She just went to the mall with Xiao Zhu and Xiao Huan. Today they could bring back everything that they could bring back. Li Yi felt that it was necessary to discuss with Ruoqing and give her the title of Rainbow Saintess. Not to mention other things, just her ability of rainbow in daylight was enough for her to establish her own faction. After today, the historical problems of Shu province were almost all solved. Li Yi could wait for his 2-3 Xiaonyang sons to marry into his family. Thinking about it carefully, there didn't seem to be a big enough bet at home. Today he would ask Uncle Han to make one for him. In the depths of the land of Bedlam, somewhere deep in the mountains, 3 wretched figures came out of the woods. When they stood on a wide mountain road, they couldn't help but burst into laughter. These three people were naturally the right custodian of the holy religion Feng Yu and the two purple-clothed messengers. Since that night they had been on the run for more than a month. That day they were chased by dozens of experts. They only cared about running for their lives and lost their direction. They wandered around the mountains like headless flies, eating and sleeping in the open, cutting their way through brambles and thorns and finally found the right path. They had suffered quite a lot along the way. At that moment Feng Yu's clothes had been torn into rags, his face was covered in dirt and his hair was stuck together. The two purple-robed envoys beside him were not in a better condition, and even appeared to be in a worse state. One looked at him and asked in a hoarse voice, "Guardian, where are we going now?" "Although it is wrong," Feng Custodian and said. Feng Yu looked ahead, gritted his teeth and said, "Let's go to Qi Kingdom first and meet up with Her Highness. When we're done with Qi Kingdom we'll come back and kill Li Yi and those Baldies." This time he fell into the Baldies' trap. Not only did he fail to capture Li Yi but he also almost lost his life. The elites of the holy religion under his command would not have a good ending if they fell into the Baldies' hands. With such a huge loss he even lost his base in the land of Bedlam. When he returned to the Qi Kingdom he would most likely be punished by Saintis. But he didn't have to worry too much. Blood was thicker than water. No matter how angry Saintis was, she wouldn't do anything to him. But he couldn't swallow the anger in his heart. If things in the Qi Kingdom could proceed smoothly, such a small loss would not be a big deal. He heaved a long sigh of relief. As long as Saintis was there, everything would be fine. He really didn't want to face Li Yi alone. The most important thing now was to find a few suitable clothes. "The three of you stop." A loud and clear voice suddenly came from behind. A few figures quickly rushed out of the forest and surrounded them. The fierce-looking man who led the group looked at them and said, "This is a robbery. Hand over all your valuables. If I'm in a good mood I might let you go." As he spoke his voice trailed off. Because the three people before him were really too shabby. Their faces were covered in dirt. Not to mention that they hadn't washed their faces for a long time, their clothes had long been torn into rags. They couldn't even cover their crotch. He really couldn't figure out where else they could hide their valuables. The fierce man looked at them, waved his hand impatiently and said, "Forget it, I'm unlucky to have met you three paupers. It's really unlucky. I'll let you go today. Get out of here." Feng Yu didn't leave. He was staring at the leader's bald head in a daze. When he saw this bald head, Wang Wei's hateful face would appear in his mind. Since more than a month ago what he hated the most in his heart had changed from wasting food to bald heads. The fierce-looking man looked at them and asked, "Are you deaf? Didn't you hear what I said?" Feng Yu looked at him again and the corner of his mouth twitched. Ha, bald head. This was already the territory of the Qi Kingdom. No matter how fast those bald heads were, they couldn't have come here. So the bald head in front of him was definitely not the bald head he hated. But they were all bald. For some reason the fierce-looking bald man suddenly felt cold all over and inexplicably shivered. Feng Yu and the two purple-robed envoys began to walk in the direction of those people. "What do you want?" "You're courting death. Why are you taking off my clothes?" Don't, big brother, you're a hero. You can have the socks, but can you leave a crotch cloth? It's cold, leave a pair of pants for me to wear. I beg you, big brother." After only a quarter of an hour, the mountain path was littered with the bodies of the three people, but there was no sign of them. The leader of the bald men had long been beaten black and blue and his face was swollen beyond recognition. He lay limp on the ground, his body twitching unconsciously. Although the others did not suffer the same torture as him, there were three of them who were naked from head to toe. They didn't even have a crotch cloth. They squatted down, crossed their arms, and looked at their companions beside them, shivering. "Borrow a pair of pants to wear. We're all brothers, don't be so stingy. If you don't have pants, socks will do." The capital city. The king of Shu was captured by Jiang of Silla in Shuzhou and was now secretly escorted to the capital city. Apart from the royal family and some high-ranking officials in the court, the people and officials in the capital city were still in the dark about this matter. After all, the matter of the Cui clan was no small matter. It was equivalent to treason. Although this matter had passed for a long time, it was related to the royal family. Once the king of Shu returned, it would definitely become the focus of the people and officials in the capital city. At the gate of the palace, a eunuch who had already received the news stood quietly and waited. He didn't know when, but a carriage appeared in front of him. The carriage came from afar and slowly stopped. The carriage looked very shabby. Obviously it had been traveling for a long time. A young man jumped out of the carriage and lifted the curtain, showing it to a eunuch in the palace. The eunuch asked, "Look, is this the king of Shu?" The eunuch looked at it carefully and compared it with the portrait in his hand. He nodded and said, "Without a doubt, it is the king of Shu. It's good that it is the king of Shu." The young man took the book and pen and handed it to the eunuch. He said, "If there is no problem with the goods, please sign here." "Thank you for your hard work, brother." The eunuch cupped his hands and said with a smile. In order to deceive the public, it was not a courier who secretly escorted the king of Shu from Shuzhou to the capital city, but an armed escort. This Shunfeng escort agency had just been established, but its branches had already spread across all the provinces and prefectures of the Jing kingdom. Whether it was delivering letters or goods, the speed of logistics was only inferior to the speed of the imperial court's express delivery. Moreover, it was very credible and rarely made mistakes. Although it was more expensive, it was still very popular among the people and merchants. The eunuch was already familiar with this. He took the pen and paper and said, "Please wait here for a moment. I will bring it back to His Majesty and have him sign it." Chapter 1031. Not long after, in the Hall of Diligent Government, Zhou Xian, who had just returned from the Academy of Sciences, signed a piece of paper and asked, "Where is the king of Shu now?" The eunuch replied, "The princess has temporarily sent him to Jinghe Palace." Zhou Xian walked out of the hall and walked into a palace. He stood side by side with Emmingsu. The king of Shu was not the real king of Shu, but this news could not be spread out. Otherwise, it would damage his father's reputation. Even his return to the capital had to be done quietly so as not to attract the attention of the people and officials. This was the reason why Li Yi chose to secretly send the king of Shu back without fanfare. Inside the hall, the king of Shu looked at the eunuchs and palace maids in front of him and laughed. "I thought that Li Yi was here to steal my throne. It turns out that he wants to send me back." He pointed to the people in front of him and said, "Slaves, why don't you kneel when you see me?" The eunuchs and palace maids lowered their heads and did not dare to speak. He walked around the hall and saw Zhou Xian and Emmingsu standing at the door. He pointed at them and asked, "Zhou Xian, Emmingsu, why don't you bow to me when you see me? Have you forgotten the rules I taught you?" Zhou Xian looked at him and turned to ask, "Are you crazy?" Emmingsu shook her head. "I don't know." Zhou Xian thought for a moment and waved his hand. "Forget it, it's not important." He looked behind him and said to a eunuch, "Someone bring wine." "Yes, your majesty." Soon a eunuch came out with an exquisite wine pot. Zhou Xian poured a cup of wine and handed it to the king of Shu. He said lightly, "Drink it." The king of Shu was stunned and shook his head violently. "I don't drink. Drinking will cause trouble. I don't drink. I like to drink grape wine." Zhou Xian thought for a moment and turned back. "Bring me grape wine." The king of Shu was clearly taken aback. Then he shook his head and said, "I don't drink grape wine. I want to drink water. Water is good for the body." Zhou Xian asked the eunuch to bring 3 cups to the king of Shu. He pointed to the tray and said, "This cup is wine, this cup is grape wine, and this cup is water. There must be one that you like, right?" "I don't drink wine, nor do I drink grape wine, nor do I drink water." The king of Shu suddenly waved his hand and knocked the tray over. He stretched out his hands and began to run in the hall. As he ran, he shouted, "I am the son of heaven, I am the god of heaven. I don't need to eat, I don't need to drink. I can absorb the spiritual chi of heaven and earth and the essence of the sun and moon." Zhou Xian looked at the eunuchs and palace maids beside him and said, "You can leave first." "Yes." The few of them quickly retreated and closed the door. Only then did Zhou Xian look at the king of Shu, who was letting loose in the hall. He asked, "Are you done acting?" If you say another word, I won't let them send you food or water in the future. Anyway, you can absorb the spiritual chi of heaven and earth and the essence of the sun and moon. You won't starve to death." The king of Shu stopped in his tracks and turned back to look at them. He smiled bitterly and said, "You've won, you've won. You've won the world, won the hearts of the people, won everything. Let me go, I don't want to die, I don't want to die." Zhou Xian looked at him and asked, "Who wants you to die?" The king of Shu pointed to the mess on the ground and said repeatedly, "Poisoned wine, you want me to drink poisoned wine?" Zhou Xian took out the wine pot from another tray, took a sip, poured a cup of grape wine and drank it in one gulp. Finally, he rinsed his mouth with water from another pot, looked at the king of Shu and said, "Long time no see. I'm just treating you to a cup of wine. Why are you so nervous?" The king of Shu collapsed to the ground and looked at Li Xian in despair. He asked, "Li Xian, what grudge do you have against me? You stole my princess and my throne and now you want to treat me like this. Have you forgotten?" Li Xian looked at him and said fiercely, "How can you forget? Have you forgotten that you bullied me when I was a child? You bullied me so badly. At that time I thought, don't fall into my hands in the future." Not long after, Li Xian walked out of the palace and said to the 2 imperial guards at the door, "From today on, seal up Jinghe Palace. He is not allowed to step out. Except for food and water every day, no one is allowed to enter." "Yes, your majesty." When he walked back, Li Xian turned to look at Emmingzu and asked, "Is there anything wrong with dealing with him like this?" Emmingzu did not speak, which meant that she acquiesced. "In the blink of an eye, that guy has been gone for almost a year. The last time he sent a letter saying that he was going to get married soon and that he was going to marry 2 wives. It seems to be in the next 2 days. Unfortunately, we won't be able to see it." Li Xian put his hands behind his head, stretched, and said, "Why don't we go to Shuzhou to see the suffering of the people and have a nuptial night? But it may be too late." Before he finished speaking, he felt that it was inappropriate. He turned to look at Emmingzu and immediately changed the topic. "Let's not talk about this. Emmingzu, look how blue the sky is today and how white the clouds are." As he spoke, his voice became lower. He looked at her in confusion, pointed to her hair and asked, "What's wrong with your hair? It seems to be missing." "It's nothing." She covered the strand of hair with her hand and said, "I accidentally cut it when I was practicing swordsmanship." Looking at Emmingzu, who left in a hurry, Li Xian shook his head and said, "When you practice swordsmanship, you should tie up your hair." Speaking of hair, he lowered his head and touched a sachet on his waist. There were 2 strands of hair in it. One was Qin'er's and the other was Susu's. He suddenly looked up at the direction in which Emmingzu had left, and a look of realization appeared on his face. He murmured, "Has it come to this?" According to the customs of the Jing kingdom, the wedding was divided into 6 steps. Accepting gifts, asking for names, accepting gifts, asking for dates, and welcoming in person. But when it came to Li Yi, everything was simple. Ruoqing and Zueyemo were already a family. It was not known whether and Rui could be counted as a second marriage. They were just married from one yard to another. The journey to Shuzhou was long, and it was difficult for the old lady to bear the long journey. From the few words in the letter, one could see the old lady's regret. As the governor of the capital and the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Xing Shichen was busy with official affairs. It was impossible for him to leave the capital for several months, so he sent gifts and letters very early. Ruoqing became an orphan at a very young age and grew up in a brothel. She had no relatives, so many customs and steps of the wedding could be skipped directly. Of course, it was impossible for the 4 of them to not have an elder. Second uncle sat at the front with his eyes half closed. After receiving their greetings, he lowered his head and let out a light snore. Tonight, the Jiang of Sila's mansion was particularly lively. Li Yi did not make a big fuss at the wedding. Everything was carried out in the mansion in a low-key manner. Although the people and officials of Shuzhou had known the news a long time ago, they did not know that the day of His Highness Jiang of Sila's wedding was today. Of course, even so, there were a lot of guests in the mansion. There were people from the Lu League, people from the brothel, the bald group led by Wang Wei, and people from the Willow Leaf village who had gone through thick and thin together from the beginning. Tonight there was no prince or son-in-law, only men and wine. Li Yi raised his wine cup, raised his head frequently and drank up all the wine in the cup. Fortunately, he was good at drinking, so he would not get drunk after 2 or 3 cups. Moreover, in order not to delay the wedding night, his wine was made by Xiaoxu herself. There was a strong smell of wine, but in fact the alcohol content was not high, only a little higher than grape wine, so it was not easy to get drunk. Xiaoxu decided to carry forward her bartending business, and Li Yi strongly supported her. He just promised her that he would open a tavern in Yong County in a few days and let her be the proprietress. He did not know whether her tears were because of this or because she was reluctant to see her miss get married. Maybe the latter reason was more because Xiao Cui, who was with her, also had tears in her eyes. This was a little strange. The wedding with Ruoqing and Zimo was just a ceremony. They would be the same as before, so why were they crying? What was more strange was that Xiao Huan also cried, and she cried even more sadly than them. Her tears could not be stopped. She was already an 18-year-old girl, but why did she still cry like a little girl? Chapter 1032. Tonight, the Jiang of Silla residence was filled with jubilation. Wang Wei had drunk a lot that night. His face was red and he couldn't even speak properly. He only knew how to raise his glass and said, "Come, come, come, your highness, drink." Fong rubbed his bald head and glared at him. He said, "What are you drinking for? If you want to drink, go home with your wife. Didn't you see how much the son-in-law drank tonight?" Wang Wei pushed him away. His eyes were drunk and blurred. He said, "No, this glass of wine. I must toast your highness with this glass of wine. My life was given by your highness and big sister. I can get to where I am today thanks to your highness' trust. I have no regrets in this life if I can work for your highness." Fong carried him to a bald woman and said, "Sister-in-law, I'll leave this guy to you. In the future, persuade him to drink less. He won't be able to control himself if he drinks too much. Just now I saw him groping a little girl who was serving wine. He wanted the little girl to be his concubine. The little girl was so anxious that she cried. Got it?" The bald woman nodded. She held Wang Wei's neck with one hand and looked at him coldly. Fong looked at the time and walked to the front. He said loudly, "It's getting late. Everyone should have eaten and drunk enough. Let's go," a drunk man said in a daze. "Hey, it's still early. We haven't consummated our marriage." Fong kicked his butt and said angrily, Get out. If you've drunk enough, get out. Don't cause trouble here." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "If they want to drink, let them continue to drink. There's enough wine today. They can drink as much as they want." Fong looked back and nodded. "Then let them drink here. I'll help son-in-law to rest. No need." Li Yi waved his hand. "I'm not drunk yet. I can walk by myself." His body swayed and he walked outside alone. Fong followed behind and watched him walk into a courtyard. Then he turned and left. Li Yi closed the door and blocked out all the noise outside. The whole world suddenly became quiet. Several rooms in the courtyard were lit up. Li Yi took a few steps forward. When he was about to step on the stairs, he suddenly didn't know which one to push. He stood where he was and thought for a moment. Then he stretched out his finger and muttered, "Pick an army, pick a general, pick a wife. Whoever little rooster points, it will be the one." Li Yi's finger moved slowly and he nodded every time he pointed. When he said, "Who," for the second time, his finger pointed at the room on the far left. The room on the far right belonged to Rui. From right to left it was Ruoqing, Zueyamo and Rui. Today was their wedding night. It was not good to choose between Rui, Ruoqing and Zueyamo. It was unrealistic to choose all of them, so they could only follow God's will. Li Yi walked up the stairs to the door of the leftmost room. Halfway there he stopped. Rui God's will told him to choose Rui, but he didn't dare to. He knew which one he couldn't afford to offend, God's will or Rui. So this time he had to go against God's will. He stretched out his finger again and changed the direction. He nodded and said, "Whoever little rooster points, it will be the one." His finger still stopped at the room on the far left. Li Yi put down his finger and thought to himself, would there be retribution for disobeying God's will twice in a row? Disobeying might not necessarily happen, but not disobeying it would happen immediately. Li Yi excluded Rui's room and chose a new one. This time he could finally follow God's will. He walked to the door of Rui's room and knocked on the door. The candlelight in the room that was still lit a moment ago was extinguished in the next moment. Rui's voice came from inside. "Tonight I will sleep with Xiao Huan. Husband, go find little sisters Ruoqing and Zueyamo." Although he didn't want to disobey God's will, Li Yi had no choice but to give up after knocking a few times and there was no response. He knew why Rui did this and he was a little touched. There was only one Rui in the world and it was his Rui. He didn't save the world in his previous life and he was kicked because he was willing to help others. This must be God's compensation for him. As for that bastard who returned kindness with enmity, he couldn't take revenge for this kick in this life, but in the next life he would harm his daughter and let him get what he wanted. Li Yi walked to the door of Ruoqing's room and knocked on the door. This time the candlelight in the room was extinguished after a while. Ruoqing stood on the opposite side of the door and said to him, "Tonight I will sleep with Xiao Zhu. You go find sister Rui and Zueyamo." There weren't many women as sensible as Rui, and with the addition of Ruoqing, God's compensation for him was too great. Could be seen how much that guy hurt him. In the next life, if it was not enough to have sex with one daughter, he would at least have sex with two. Li Yi stood outside Ruoqing's door for a while before walking to the door of Zui Mo's. His footsteps stopped and the candlelight in the room went out. Li Yi was startled and asked, "Do you want to say that you want to sleep with Xiao Tui tonight and ask me to find Rui and Ruoqing?" Not saying anything was a tacit agreement. Li Yi knew that Zui Mo was just a doorway and whispered, "Don't make trouble." "I'm not making trouble." Zui Mo leaned against the door and whispered, "Anyway, tonight you can't find me." Li Yi understood what she meant, and he also understood what Rui and Ruoqing meant. However, what was wrong with sleeping with Xiao Huan, Xiao Zhu and Xiao Tui? The bed was a new big bed and it was not crowded for 3 people. He had 3 beautiful wives, but he could only stay alone. This was one of the saddest things in life. On the wedding night, where to sleep at night was actually a problem. There was no bed in the study. Should he squeeze with Fong? He sat on the steps, leaning against the pillar, drowsy. Although the wine he drank at night was specially made by Xiao Zhu, it was still wine after all. After drinking too much, he still felt a little dizzy. But what Rui and the others did, the cold wind at night and the cold stone steps, made his heart and body cold and his buttocks cold, and he couldn't sleep. He shivered slightly and a fragrant wind blew, and suddenly he felt a lot warmer. Because he had a piece of clothing on his shoulders. "It's cold outside, come in." Mississippi Lu said lightly, turned around and walked into the room. On the wedding night he was locked out by his wife and was seen by his sister-in-law. This made Li Yi blush a little. This was really embarrassing. He was already familiar with Mississippi Lu's room, even more familiar than his own room. This room carried many painful memories that he didn't want to recall. Li Yi wrapped his clothes tightly, and when he stepped into the room he seemed to hear the sound of smacking echoing in his ears. Mississippi Lu poured a cup of hot tea for him and sat across from him, minding her own business. Li Yi drank a cup of tea and then he realized that there was not only tea on the table but also wine and dishes. Grumble. His stomach began to growl in disappointment. Just now it was only at the beginning, and then he only cared about drinking. Now that he smelled the aroma, he felt unbearably hungry. He licked his lips, picked up the chopsticks on the table and began to wolf down the food. Mississippi Lu glanced at him and reminded him, "These are my chopsticks." Li Yi curled his lips and said, "Don't be so stingy. If you want to eat, then get another pair. We're a family, why bother about these things?" Mississippi Lu reminded him again, "Those are the chopsticks I used just now." Okay, I'll give them back to you." Li Yi took a few more mouthfuls of food, returned the chopsticks to her and said, "Then get me a new pair." Mississippi Lu took a new pair of chopsticks, but it was not for Li Yi, and she ate while drinking. Women were really strange creatures. One moment they wanted it, the next moment they didn't. Li Yi shook his head and poured himself a cup. Tonight, in order not to affect the wedding night, Li Yi asked Xiao Zhu to make a few pots of wine for him. Now that the wedding night was over, he should drink to his heart's content on this big day. He looked at Rui opposite him and thought to himself, God's will is God's will. After going around in a big circle, in the end he still had to spend the wedding night with Rui. On both sides of the square table, one was dressed in white and the other was dressed in red, but there seemed to be no conflict between them. The atmosphere was extremely harmonious, as if everything was supposed to be like this. Once you drink too much, you can't control your mouth. What's more, today was a good day. Once people had a good life, they would always think about better things. It was better to add flowers to a brocade than to add snow to snow. Li Yi looked at Rui and suddenly said, "Rui, let's discuss something." Mississippi Lu looked up at him and asked, "What is it?" Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "In the future, can you be gentler to me? Don't spank my butt anymore." Mississippi Lu thought for a moment, looked at him and asked, "Then will you still be so naughty in the future?" Chapter 1033. Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu with a troubled expression and said, I'll try my best." Mississippi Lu nodded and said, "Then I'll try my best too." "You can't try your best." Li Yi drank another glass of wine to boost his courage and said, "You see, I'm a prince now and I have so many people under me. I also want my face. If you keep hitting me like this and others see it, how can I show my authority?" Mississippi Lu didn't say anything. She just looked at the wedding robe draped over his shoulder. The red was a little dazzling. She smiled and nodded, "Okay. Then it's a deal." Li Yi's face lit up with joy and stretched out his finger. "Pinky swear." "Childish." Mississippi Lu glanced at him, then stretched out her little finger and hooked it together with her thumb. "That's a deal." If you go back on your word, you'll suffer retribution. Be careful that you won't be able to marry for the rest of your life." Li was overjoyed. He filled her cup with wine and said, "Drink. Let's drink to our vow. This glass is for today's big day. This glass is for capturing me up the mountain. This glass is for the king of bandits." Li didn't know how much Mississippi Lu could drink. He only remembered that at the beginning she would get drunk and blush when she drank the tasteless liquor. That was the only time he saw her drunk. Today was the second time. Li didn't know what time it was. The dishes were gone and the table was filled with empty wine jars. Li felt like the world was spinning around him, but he refilled their glasses out of habit. He put his hand on her shoulder and said, "This cup is for you being a man." Mississippi Lu's eyes were blurred. She waved her hand and said, "No, I'll be drunk if I drink any more." "It's okay, you can't drink, I'll drink for you." Li drank both glasses of wine. Mississippi Lu's cheeks were red and she frowned. "I can't drink? What a joke, bring the wine." "There's no more." Li took a few empty wine jars and shook his head. He put the wine jars back and turned around. He found Mississippi Lu sitting at the table, holding her cheek with one hand and looking at him with blurred eyes. Li was startled and said, "I'll be embarrassed if you look at me like this." She looked for a long time and suddenly said, "Let me ask you a question." Li sat down beside her and asked, "What is it?" "Who's prettier, Mingzili and Li?" "You too." Li thought for a moment and said, "I don't know who's prettier." "You don't know?" Lady Lu's voice rose a pitch. "It's okay." Li waved his hand, patted her chest and said, "Although the two of you are about the same beauty, your breasts are bigger than hers. She definitely won't be able to catch up in this lifetime." "It's okay." Li waved his hand. He patted her chest and said, "You asked first." Unexpectedly, Mississippi Lu just waved her hand casually and said, "Forget it. It's not the first time anyway." However, Miss Lu just casually waved her hand and said, "Forget it. It's not the first time anyway." Li looked at her and murmured, "Not the first time?" She didn't explain further and picked up a wine pot. However, she didn't pour any wine out. She stood up and walked towards the bed unsteadily, saying, "You can go back. I'm tired. I want to sleep. They don't want you and I don't want you." Mississippi Lu grabbed his arm and said, "You should go back. I'm sleepy. I want to sleep. They don't want you and I don't want you." Mississippi Lu grabbed his arm and said, "Get up." Li suddenly opened his eyes. He looked at her and asked, "You don't want me either?" Mississippi Lu stood by the bed and stared at him. After a while, she rolled him to the foot of the bed. "Yes." She lay down beside him and said, "They don't want you but I want you." She turned around and looked at Li. "I have one more question." Li closed his eyes and murmured, "Why do you have so many questions? Are you asking 100,000 whys? Do you still want to go back?" "Go back to where?" "Go back to where you came from." "Yes." Li opened his eyes. His gaze was blurry. He said, "Even in my dreams." Mississippi Lu's eyelashes fluttered. She looked confused and asked, "Don't you want everything here? Don't you want my sister? Don't you want Duaner? Don't you want Xiao Huan? Don't you want Yongning? Don't you want Mingzu? Don't you want me?" "Yes, I want everything." "Then why do you still want to go back?" "I miss my mother." After a moment of silence, Mississippi Lu stretched out her hand and slapped his butt through the quilt. She said angrily, "Why didn't you say so earlier?" Li's hands were rolled up in the quilt. He couldn't move. He squirmed a few times and said, "We just made a pinky promise. You still hit me. Be careful. No one wants you in the future. If no one wants you, then no one wants you." Li suddenly laughed. "Pa, don't worry. If no one wants you in the future, don't forget about me. Don't forget about you. You don't want me either. You've already used this trick. Don't forget about me. I'll support you." Her raised hand fell down again. Her eyelashes fluttered a few times. After a long time she said slowly, "I'm sleepy." This time she didn't get any response. She opened her eyes and looked at him in his sleep. There was still a smile on her face. Her breathing gradually calmed down. She just stared. When Li woke up, he found that he had a terrible headache. He thought that Mississippi Lu must have made him drunk again last night. He opened his eyes and wanted to get up from the bed, only to find that he couldn't get up at all. He was rolled up in the quilt. The culprit was sleeping next to him. She was sound asleep and hadn't woken up yet. The person lying next to his pillow was actually Mississippi Lu. This gave Li a fright. But looking at the situation now, they should just be lying on the same bed. Nothing serious happened. Only then did he finally relax. He spent a lot of effort to get out of the quilt. He carefully got off the bed and looked back. Mississippi Lu was still asleep. What a pig, Li shook his head. When he was about to leave, he suddenly turned around after taking 2 steps. He stared blankly at the figure on the bed. Mississippi Lu. The sleeping Mississippi Lu. The defenseless Mississippi Lu. She slept soundly on her side. Her back was facing Li. A certain perky part of her was facing him. Li's gaze fell on that part of Mississippi Lu's body. A bold idea suddenly popped up in his mind. What goes around comes around. This year it's my turn. Sooner or later you'll have to pay for what you've done. Pay them back in their own coin. It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. At this moment he thought of many words from the ancients. The ancients didn't lie to me. Countless painful memories emerged in his heart. Li raised his head and hit her without hesitation. Smack. Li swore that this was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard in his life. All the humiliation he had suffered in the past disappeared in this smack. At this moment he felt that he had reached the peak of his life. Then he saw Mississippi Lu turn her head and look at him with a pair of deep eyes. The sky was slightly bright. Fong came out of the courtyard. He opened the door and stretched his body. Bang! In the prince's mansion, one of the courtyard doors suddenly shattered. 2 figures jumped out one after another. Fong's expression changed. Did assassins break into the residence of eldest miss and second miss? Soon he dispelled this thought. Because the people who came out one after another were the son-in-law and second Mississippi. The next moment his expression became even more horrified. Because he realized that the son-in-law was wearing second Miss's clothes early in the morning. Moreover, both of them were barefooted. His body shuddered as he immediately thought of a terrifying possibility. Could it be that the son-in-law was drunk last night and went into the wrong room? On the wedding night he went into the wrong room and slept on the wrong bed? Or perhaps he slept with the wrong person? Help! Someone's been killed. He looked in the direction of the scream in a daze and sighed. What a sin.